This guy was a poor worker with a normal life, but he was betrayed by his girlfriend for being poor and talentless. She left him for a guy who was getting rich. But what she didn't expect was that Lin wasn't exactly as poor as she thought. Lin became a multi-millionaire by discovering a system that let him change jobs every week, earning him large sums of money, as well as luxury cars and properties. His girlfriend's betrayal wasn't a cause for sadness. In fact, it opened doors for him to meet new women who valued him and were even more attractive with incredible curves. The story begins with Lin Yi being fired from his job, and apparently he wasn't even given a reason why. He then calls his girlfriend, Cece Liu, to try and break the news, but before he can say anything, she tells him she wants to break up because Lin is still poor even after all their time together. She tells him he doesn't need to come to her party anymore and that he should never call her again. As he gets into the elevator on the worst day of his life, Lin notices a suspicious blue light surrounding him. Suddenly, a beautiful woman dressed as a maid called him master, saying that she was his servant Lin Wei and welcomed him to the full career experience system. Basically, he can try a new profession every week, and completing all the tasks will give him a final reward. Clearly on cloud 9, he thought it was finally time to stop being a complete nobody. As if getting the new job wasn't enough, he also won a starting prize of 10 million and a Pagani Zonda worth 30 million. When he comments that he could be a driver for the rest of his life with a car like that, she reminds him that he could only try one profession per week, but apparently Lin didn't care about that, since he was getting a lot of money. Next, she takes the car key from him, saying that he needed to claim the Peninsula Hotel, and after giving the coordinates of the car's location, she hands the key to him. When he arrives at the garage, he notices a beautiful woman in front of him named Ji Qing Yang. Apparently, she was having some problems with her car, and when he asks what happened to Miss Ji, she tells him what had happened, and he asks if she would like a ride, and she clearly accepts. Suddenly, the spoiled young man arrives hugging her, saying that he would give her a ride since Lin seemed to be broke, but apparently she had already rejected this young man a few times before, and rejected him again. Lin then takes matters into his own hands, and says that he would be in charge of taking her to where she needed to go. She then tells her stalker that she didn't mind going in a broken down car, but let's just say that they were both suddenly surprised when they saw the 30 million Pagani, making the spoiled brat impressed with it. Finally, Lin asks Miss G to get in the car, this time humiliating the little boy's car that was there. As they got into the car, the spoiled brat was asking to go for a spin with him, but was left behind eating the Pagani's dust. She, impressed with his car, asks if he really owned the car, since recently he was just an employee in the sales department, and he says yes, and that he was a rich kid who was just there to experience what it was like to be poor. Lin then asks her to start a ride on the Blah Blah app and become his first customer, and so she did. With the request made, he took her to the location, and finally says goodbye to his new private driver. Suddenly, the girl from before appears in miniature form on his shoulder, congratulating him for completing his first task, rewarding him with 50 million, and he was impressed with the amount he received for just completing a single ride. At the Peninsula Hotel, his ex was with her new rich boyfriend, wishing she had met him sooner, and suddenly she realizes that Lin was there too. She, upon seeing him, thought that he had gone there only to win her back, but he made it very clear that he was just there to spend some money. She then decides to call the security guards to kick him out, and as if that wasn't enough, she still insults him by calling him a beggar. But when the security guards arrived, they all prostrated themselves before him, leaving both her and her boyfriend impressed by the authority he had over that place, and this only increases when one of the security guards calls him to the meeting room to report their performance. Only then did the Viper realize that she had lost a rich man. In the meeting room, an employee enters saying that there was a customer who wanted to file a complaint against them, just for having rented a car that was already being used by some VIP users. With that, he leaves the finances with them and decides to go to the location to talk to the girl. When she answers the door, he says that he would solve her problem, and her name was Gu Jingsua, but I'll just call her Jin. With that, the protagonist asks if she wouldn't like to rent his Pagani, but since she couldn't afford to rent supercars like that, she says she didn't know how to drive a car like that. With that, he suggests that he take her to where she was going, and she ends up accepting, asking him to wait a little while she got ready. While she was getting ready, he had a privileged view that few in life have, and she was finally ready. In the main hall, the snake was dumping her new rich boyfriend, and he finally realized what kind of woman she was. Cece was bragging, thinking that Lin would really forgive her, just for the fact that they had been together for so many years. Her friend then started to get a little jealous of her, but she says that she would take her for a ride in the Pagani later. But little did she know that Lin was already in very good company, and Cece approaches him as if nothing had happened, saying that she would take care of his business from now on. With all the kindness in the world, Lin says that it was none of her business who that girl was, and here she plays the victim, asking if he didn't love her anymore, and even says that the girl next to him didn't have as good skills as hers to manage his business. Jin then joins the game, and says that a little while ago he had said that she was much better than his ex-girlfriend, and he takes the opportunity to add that she also had great flexibility. He then decides to leave, and his ex said that she was willing to be even the second option if he wanted, but he tells her to leave, among other things, and that she should not bother him anymore, leaving her on the floor getting revenge for being humiliated on the phone. Inside the car, she tells him where she was going and apologizes for bothering him, but it was no bother at all, since she had just helped him with the problem as well. At the hotel where she was going, her friends were complaining that she was late, and it seems they didn't believe that Jin actually had a rich boyfriend like she always said. A short time later, they arrive in his Pagani, and her friends were impressed by her boyfriend's car. With that, she says that she had helped him before, and asked him to do the same for her now, and finally Lin says goodbye to her as if he were really her boyfriend. In one part of the city, an old lady was complaining that Lin was 10 days late with the rent, and her daughter was trying to calm her down, while the old woman complained that he might run away. Someone ended up knocking on the door, and upon opening it, it was Lin who was there to say goodbye, as he was leaving and had only come to pack his things. The lady then says that he needed to pay what he owed before leaving, already completely agitated. He owed $2,000 in rent, but sent $4,000 to her account as compensation for the previous delay. Since he was moving out so suddenly, the landlady asked if he had found something new, and he says that he was now a blah-blah driver. As he went to his car, the old woman decided to follow him just to see if he hadn't stolen anything from her house, and they come across a beautiful Pagani that was parked right in front of her residence. When she asks where his old car was, he finally reveals that he was the owner of the Pagani that was there, leaving her speechless for having gotten so rich so suddenly, and he just says that he stopped pretending, as he was just experiencing what it was like to be poor. When he leaves in a hurry, the girl started to think that she might have a chance with him, but her mother says that since he wasn't good enough when he was poor, now that he was rich, she didn't stand a chance. At the hotel he was managing, his employees had reserved a presidential suite for him, and he finally got to have a good meal after so long without eating. He then receives a message from Miss G, asking him to pick her up as she had finished her work. 30 minutes later, he had gone to pick up the beautiful princess, and as soon as she gets in the car, he asks if she wouldn't like to place an order. A little confused by what he was talking about, she asks what kind of order it was, and he says it was the blah blah app order, otherwise he wouldn't make any money. She, realizing that he took this blah blah ride business seriously, wonders how someone so dedicated could have been fired. She worked at the same company as him, but had a management position or something like that. Suddenly, the girl from before appears, telling him not to worry because Miss G couldn't see her. She then says that the girl in his car was very beautiful, and the system gave her a score of 85. In addition, he successfully completed the second request and got a new task where he needed to transport 2 women with a score of 85 or more, in addition to other rewards. Lin then asks what kind of woman was considered above 85 points, and she says it would be a woman like Miss G. After that, the beautiful damsel in his car asks if he wouldn't take her home, and it seemed like he was going through a more difficult time than her. When he asks if her problem was a personal or business matter, she says it was business, as they needed to hold a launch event soon and hadn't been able to rent a hotel yet. When he tells her to go to the Peninsula Hotel, she thought she wouldn't have a chance of getting reservations at a super hotel like that. Lin replies that that wasn't necessarily true. After all, life was full of surprises, and she compliments him for being so good with words, asking him to turn the car around and go to the Peninsula Hotel. However, she says that if they didn't get a deal, she wouldn't pay for the change of route, and when he asks what would happen if she did get the deal, she asks back what he would like as a reward, and he says that she would have to do 10 squats in front of him. When he tells her to look up the type of squat on her phone, she realizes that it was too embarrassing, but soon remembers that earlier she had already called to try to make a reservation, and the manager had said that there was nothing available at the moment, so her chances of winning were practically certain, and she ends up accepting his offer. At the hotel reception, Miss G says that she would like to speak with manager Wang, and the receptionist wonders if this was her boss's new love, pretending to be poor again, and that she was much more beautiful than the ex-girlfriend. In the hall, the manager receives her, and she asks if they would have a hotel auditorium available for rent, and thanks to the help of Lin, who was behind her commanding everything, the manager says that he could arrange the rental for any day she wanted. Over the moon, she thanks him and gives the date she would like to rent. After that, her problem was solved, and Lin says that it was now time for her to keep her promise, the bet they had made earlier, and she asks if he still remembered it. But still, as she was the president of the company, she had to keep her promise, and he approaches her so that she could do the squats. However, since they were still inside the car, she asks if they couldn't go to her house and talk about it, and since it was very small and cramped there, it was indeed better for them to go to her house. He then steps on the gas to get there as quickly as possible, leaving her in doubt as to why he was so excited about it. Arriving at the Divine Lady's house, she asks if he would like to receive the payment at that moment, and he clearly answers yes. Before she starts, she says that she had never done this kind of thing before, so he shouldn't complain if she didn't do well, and finally her training begins. Apparently the protagonist was enjoying every second of it, but unfortunately she only had time to do one, as her father suddenly appeared asking what his daughter was doing, leaving them both completely speechless after that sudden appearance. Miss G, all embarrassed, asks what her father was doing there, and says that Lin was actually her new yoga instructor. Apparently her father didn't fall for the bullshit, since no instructor just stood there watching without doing the movements together, and she says that he was actually an advanced instructor, only for verbal guidance. The old man then sits next to Lin this time, and asks what his name was and what he did for a living, and Lin says that he was a blah-blah driver, but a sports car driver, leaving the old man in doubt as to what car he had to have made his daughter get into his car. When he realizes that it was the Pagani that was parked in front of the parking lot outside, his treatment of Lin changed from night and day, saying that now he could trust his daughter to him, but she says that they didn't have that kind of relationship. Next, her father says that they could go to the family's grandfather's birthday together, and asks him to go ahead with their fun, finally leaving the two of them alone. The divine lady says that her father had misunderstood the situation, and the protagonist takes an action that honestly impressed me, showing that he wasn't there to play games, telling them to continue from where they had left off. She pushes him away before the situation got more delicate, but he was just referring to the exercises from before, while she was thinking about educational activities. He then receives a message on his cell phone from the people at the old company where he worked, asking him to go to a dinner at a restaurant that same night, and he says goodbye to Miss G, saying that they would continue from where they had left off later. Arriving there, a woman who was apparently the one with the highest position there asked him to sit down and began to praise him too much. The real reason for this invitation was actually to make him jealous, since one of the employees there had just received a promotion to head of the sales department, and Lin's theory was completely right. Suddenly, a restaurant employee asks whose Pagani was downstairs, and while Lin was asking what had happened to the Pagani, the guys who would never have a car like that in their lives were impressed with the machine. The employee then says that it was blocking other cars, so he asked the owner to move the car from where it was. When one of the employees from Lin's old company tells him to take it down a notch, Lin reveals that the Pagani was actually his. With that, he quickly put the one who was only there to humiliate him in his place, and says goodbye to the girl who had invited him, saying that he would take food to eat at home. After that, the scorpion from before apologizes to Lin, asking him to stay a little longer, but Lin refuses his apology, as there was no reason to accept the request for forgiveness. Miss Yin ended up accompanying him on the way home, and he asks her if she wouldn't like to place an order so that he could complete his task again. She clearly accepts his request, but her total score was only 84 points, not meeting the necessary requirements to complete the task. For him, this score was wrong, and he asks if she knew of any way to increase women's charm. She takes a piece of clothing out of her bag to put on, improving her appearance a little, and asks what he thought, already thinking that he wanted something. After the new scan, she got 85 points, and he won a villa in Kyushu. Therefore, he needed to meet with the sales manager to receive his reward. After that, she asks if he wouldn't like to come up to talk better, since her husband was out on business that day, but Lin gently rejects her offer, despite wanting to go ahead with it, and they finally say goodbye. The next day, he goes to the Kyushu sales department to receive his reward, and an employee who was a former colleague of his asks what he was doing there. He replies that he had gone to receive a deed to his property, but since she couldn't believe him, she starts pushing him out, until a superior of hers asks what she was doing. The manager orders her to leave there immediately. She then offered to show the property to the protagonist, but the girl from before still insisted that he couldn't afford any of the villas they had. The manager then orders her to go to HR as she had just been fired, saying that she never wanted to see her there again for lying so much. However, the girl says that it wasn't a lie and that she knew everything about him, but in fact, that was what she thought, since Lin had bought 9 villas in Kyushu. Only then did the girl realize that she no longer knew her old classmate. Even the protagonist was impressed with this news. The manager apologizes for what happened earlier, but he says it was okay. After all, she had already fired the previous employee. After a while with the formalities done, he asks her to deliver the deeds to his properties, and so she did, along with all the keys. He receives news from Miss Yin that the 2 guys from before who tried to humiliate him at the restaurant were fired. He then sends her a message asking if she had anything to do with it, and she reveals that she had researched the reason for his dismissal and immediately fired them both because of it. After talking for a bit, she asks him to pick her up at the office since her car was still being repaired. Following this, he receives a new task where he needed to get 5 5-star reviews to receive a new reward. At the end of the journey, he asks Miss Yin not to forget his stars, and she says that she would trade the squats for the 5-star review then. However, he quickly advances, saying that he didn't want 5 stars if she wasn't going to do the squats, so he wanted her to do all 9 that were still left. After that, she finally gets out of the vehicle, and Miss Yin realizes that she had just gotten out of the protagonist's car. car. With that, he tries to invent an excuse suddenly, even though she hadn't even asked anything before. Yin then starts to think that she wouldn't have a chance with him, since he was apparently interested in Miss G. She still thinks this even though she's married. The brain cells for this topic were definitely left at the hospital. The Divine Lady then calls for Yin so they could go back to work, but not before leaving a 5-star review for our protagonist. We continue with Lin accepting a new ride on the Blah Blah app, but before reaching the location, the client was asking him to pretend to be her boyfriend, and he clearly accepted the young girl's request. Arriving at the location, he comes across a beautiful damsel, and her name was Yu, a famous streamer, and let's just say she was enchanted with him too. Yu's parents arrive to meet the young protagonist, but when he says that he was a Blah Blah driver, their expressions clearly did not show approval. The little damsel even tries to explain to her parents that being a Blah Blah driver has been very profitable lately, but they still didn't believe her words much. Before the situation got any worse, Yu hurries her parents to go to the party, but Lin's car only had capacity for 2 people, so they would have to go in another car. As they went to Lin's car, they clearly thought that their daughter had gotten a terrible person as a boyfriend. That is, until they saw the Pagani parked outside, and Lin asks the beautiful damsel to get into his machine. When her parents saw that Lin actually had a lot of money, their expressions and their way of acting changed completely. On the way to where Yu was going, she asks if it would be a problem if she opened a live stream inside his car, but he lets her be comfortable, but in return, he would like her to give him the 5 stars after this ride. On her live stream, people thought that she had done some kind of educational trick to have been able to rent a car like that, but she clarifies that he was a Blah Blah driver. However, in her thoughts, she was saying that if he were willing to pay for her, she didn't think she would play hard to get. I imagine you've already gotten the message here. At the end of the ride, she gave him the 5 stars promised earlier, and the bunny from before appears in an unusual place this time, rewarding him for completing his previous goal of 5 5-star reviews. After that, he asks Yu if she knew that place well, as he needed to change his cell phone, and she decides to help him with his problem. With that, they go to the Bitten Apple store, and when choosing one that he would like to buy, she says that they could buy a much cheaper cell phone online, but he doesn't see the need for it. When the salesman returns to deliver the cell phone to Lin, he offers another case to give the cell phone more protection. But since he didn't like using cases much, he replies that his intention was actually to buy a few more cell phones, so if one breaks, just replace it with another. When he says that he would like 5 units of each color and also a MacBook, Yu realizes the absurd amount of money the protagonist had, and on her live stream things were going very well too, as people were loving to see that kind of thing. Leaving the store, the beautiful damsel asks if he would like to go to one more place to buy a few more things, and he decides to go to a watch store this time. But it was clear that the saleswoman in this store was a bit snobbish, as she was judging a book by its cover just because the girl was a streamer. He then chose a watch to take, but the saleswoman was not very good at receiving them, and says that the display models could only be shown if he had made the payment beforehand, which doesn't make much sense since we first need to see something up close to be able to actually buy it. Suddenly, another customer arrives with his companion, and it was clear that the difference in treatment here is absurdly large. And when the simp's companion becomes interested in one of their watches, the bitter saleswoman took the watch to show it to her up close. With that, Lin was outraged by the absurd difference in treatment that she gave to the simp, feeling completely despised in that store. However, she replies that their service was equivalent to the level of their customers, so she hoped for his understanding. Clearly, he became even more outraged, especially because she was nothing more than a snake who only judged a book by its cover, and in the end, he decides to leave to go to another store. In the competing store, they were very well received, unlike the previous store. Lin, as he didn't have much experience in that area, asked for Yu's help, for her to help him choose something, but she was also not very familiar with that price level. The people on her live stream told him to buy a watch from the anniversary collection, and Lin then did what the people were saying, and asked for the watch from the anniversary collection that they had, leaving all the attendants there completely impressed with his attitude. When Lin asks if this wouldn't be possible, she says that it would clearly be possible, but since that watch was not in stock because it was a limited edition, they would need to order it, and she herself would deliver it to his house when it was ready. When Yu asks if they didn't have that watch in such a large store, one of the attendants says that there were only 6 of those watches in the world, so it wasn't even in that country. With all this commotion, the people in the Viper's store were curious to see who had bought the 10 million watch, but upon arriving at the store, she realizes that the one who had bought it was precisely the guy she had just belittled, and she had the audacity and boldness to still call him to take a look at her store, but as she said that he was too poor for the level of her store, he even gently refused her offer, leaving her on the floor completely regretful for her arrogant attitude earlier. On the way out of the store, he apologizes to Yu for making her accompany him during his entire journey, and gives her a new cell phone as a reward and apology, and finally she thanks him, and they finally say goodbye. After his last race, Lin had gone to a racetrack to receive receive his reward. Arriving at the reception, the girl says that they had received a VIP reception that day, so they were closed to the public. However, Lin says that he was not there to play, but to see the manager, and asks her to help him with that. Suddenly, a young man enters next, named Kim Han, asking why the protagonist was there since he had reserved the entire place just for him. The attendant apologizes, saying that the young man was just there to talk to the manager, while her twin sister took Lin to his destination. He then asks who the guy was who had rented the entire racetrack, and the attendant says that he was a celebrity, and there weren't many people who dared to mess with him. In the manager's office, he was clearly very well received, and the manager reveals to everyone there that Lin was now the owner of their racetrack, so from now on, he was the boss there. After that, the manager takes Lin for a ride on the racetrack and better introduces the place that he was now the owner of, and asks if our protagonist wouldn't like to take a ride on the racetrack, and Lin ends up accepting his generous offer. Kim didn't like the manager taking people there, since he had reserved the entire place just for him, but the manager soon clarifies to the young man that this was actually the sole owner of the place where they were. Lin asks the manager to remove those outsiders from there. After all, he was in the mood for a few laps on the racetrack, and could even give him his money back if necessary. Since no one had ever had the courage to treat Kim this way, he suggests a race to our protagonist, saying that whoever won could stay at the place. After Lin ends up accepting his offer, he is curious to see what Lin's car was, saying that he could even change cars if necessary, if he thought his car was too powerful. However, when he sees that it was a Pagani Zonda, he is completely speechless after that. And finally, they prepare to compete, but in the end, there wasn't much of a chance for Kim, as Lin ended up easily winning the race between them, thus gaining the respect and admiration of the famous young man, who even asked to follow Lin on social media. Kim then asks for some tips on what he could have done to improve his start at the beginning of the race, and Lin did give him some information to improve a little. Lin ended up receiving a new race request shortly after on his blah blah app, and tells the manager that he had to go so Kim could stay there, and it would be on the house. The young man then asks what kind of work he had, since he was in such a hurry to leave, and upon saying that he was a blah blah driver, he ended up leaving the young man completely speechless after hearing that. At the place where he would pick up his ride, we see the divine lady, who hadn't even finished getting ready for her suitor, and let's just say he didn't care much about it. She then gets straight to the point, and asks him to wait for her, and tells him to go play games or do something else while she finished getting ready. When he sits down to access the computer, he says that there was a new email for her, and she, thinking it was regarding some kind of business document or something, ended up letting it go. But upon realizing that it was actually a piece of clothing that she had bought earlier on the internet, she quickly goes back so as not to let him see it, although it was already too late. At one point, she ended up slipping and almost falling, and when he tries to help her so that she wouldn't get hurt, let's just say he ended up having a rather privileged view, which ended up making red juice come out of his nostrils due to the strong emotion. With all this embarrassment, she leaves, all ashamed, and a short time later she returns all dressed up, asking how she looked in that new outfit. If I could make a comment now, it would be that that outfit showed that her health was completely in order, but since I can't comment on anything, I'll just stay silent. With that, Lin replies that that new outfit was suitable for beauty pageants, and even more suitable for doing the squats she owed him. She then tells him not to worry, as she hadn't forgotten about the squats she owed, and asks him to close the curtains so that she could pay her debt. And finally, the environment was completely prepared for the most educational physical activities anyone has ever seen. However, as I clearly can't show it here, we'll have to be content with just this preparation of hers, although nothing much actually happened. After keeping her promise, she hurries him so they can go to an exchange, which she had to go to, but let's just say he got too excited and had to go to the bathroom quickly, and half an hour later he comes back happy as a clam, all relieved. I imagine that some have already realized why he decided to leave for a while. After all, the view he had was enough to make anyone drop dead, if you know what I mean. Suddenly, as they were leaving, the divine lady's parents appear, and since they didn't want to interrupt the couple, her father asks if they were already done. However, she ended up going crazy, asking what he was talking about, and the old man says that he had arrived there a long time ago, but since they saw the curtains closed, he didn't dare to enter so as not to disturb them. And even her mother joined the conversation too, saying that she didn't need to be ashamed as this was a normal daily need. Before leaving and letting them go to their engagement, the lady's mother calls him to go to her grandfather's birthday, which would take place 2 days later, and he ended up accepting her offer, while the divine lady was all embarrassed in the background. When he finally takes Miss G to her engagement, he asks her not to forget to give him the 5 stars, and tells her to place the order on the way back too, that he would come running to pick her up. She apparently was a little jealous of him, and says that he probably always received good reviews from his female clients, and let's just say he couldn't help that from happening. Finally, they say goodbye, and he tells her to get in touch if she needed anything. After that, the girl dressed as a bunny from before was now dressed as a cheerleader, congratulating him for for having completed another task, and as a reward this time, he got 21% of the assets of the blah blah company, now becoming one of the CEOs of blah blah, just for having done a few rides. She then said that the place where the blah blah headquarters was located had an estimated value of 500 billion, and if he sold his stake in the company, he could easily profit at least 10 billion. However, since this one is smart, he decided to keep his shares and have them yield a few hundred million in dividends each year. Upon saying that he had completed 55% of his career and that he could receive an even more generous reward when he reached 100%, he became even more excited to move forward with his life as a blah blah driver, or at least that's what he thought, since soon he would have to deal with a client who would drive him crazy. Parking the car next to her, he asks if she was the person he had come to pick up, and she replies yes, thinking that she had dressed so well that even the rich guy had become interested in her. Already inside the car, she asks where he would like to take her, saying that she was not a very easy person to please, and he asks if it wasn't she who had placed the order on blah blah. She, outraged that he was an app driver, didn't believe his words, and he says that this was actually the company's new service, a luxury version, so to speak. Her disappointment was so great that she ended up showing her second face to him, thinking that she had actually found a rich guy. During the way, she ended up making our protagonist completely stressed, and to get revenge, he made her go through some rather complicated and embarrassing situations, I would say, and tells her to get out of his car, as if tormenting his life before wasn't enough. She also says that she would leave a bad review on the app and would also call to complain about him. Leaving there, he receives a call from the regional agent of blah blah, who gives him a good scolding for having acted that way with a client, saying that it would be deducted from his deposit if it happened again. Lin then returns the complaint, saying that he could deduct it if he wanted, and not liking Lin's response, he says that he would suspend his operating qualification. When Lin asks if he had ever stopped to think about the consequences if he suspended his qualification, it was the checkmate for him to just tell Lin to wait for the suspension, hanging up the phone in his face in the most impolite way. After that, Lin had gone to visit his villas in Kyushu, or at least I think that's what it was, and he was very well received upon arriving there. At a certain point, the young man who was attending him said that he had hired some housekeepers and would like to introduce them to him, and Lin decides to accompany him to the place where they were. However, arriving there, let's just say he finds precisely the girl from before who thought she was all that and a bag of chips. The manager then, upon seeing the way she treated Lin, scolds his employee. With that, Lin asks why she was there, and if it was for her to work as a maid or something. She then responds rudely, saying that it was none of his business, and a blah blah driver was never supposed to be there. With this arrogant attitude on her part, the manager gives the Viper a good slap in the face, asking how she dared to speak to the owner of the Kyushu court in that way. Apparently the manager was her cousin, and she still insisted that there was no way he could be the owner of the place, since he was a simple blah blah employee. The manager then tells her to apologize to Lin, and only then did she realize that he really was the owner of that place, and with that, she finally decides to leave her pride aside and apologizes to him, asking for another chance. However, it was too late now, and Lin says that she had horrible bad breath, so Lin asked the security guards to remove her from there, and they clearly did so. After getting rid of the scum of society, the manager finally introduces the 4 housekeepers that he had prepared for Lin. Seeing that they didn't seem very happy, he tells them to let them all go back, and would reimburse 5,000 to each of them for travel expenses. After that, he receives a message from the divine lady, who was already ready to place the order for him to pick her up, and finally, he leaves, asking his manager to find some more housekeepers for him. At the place where the divine lady was, her friend was asking her not to leave yet, and to stay for a second round, and a young man named Jim asked for the same thing too, saying that he would take her home later. But since Ms. D was very busy with work, she had to leave, and had already asked for her driver to pick her up too. And speaking of him, he finally arrives at the establishment to pick up his beautiful damsel, but apparently the young man didn't like seeing this scene very much. While Gray was seething inside, his friend was saying that Lin was very handsome and could even be a model or something. With that, the spoiled and happy-go-lucky little boy says that it was no use being handsome since he was just the blah blah driver, and then asks what was wrong with that. The young man says that he just thought he was very lucky to know Ms. D. The young man then says that his friend wasn't very smart, since even though he was a driver, he still had a sense of superiority. And since she didn't like what the young man had just said, she defends him by saying that he really had to have that sense of superiority. The girl who was accompanying the young man then says that her companion had bought a Mercedes, and the protagonist would never in his life be able to save up money to buy a car like that. After this shameful scene, the divine lady tells him not to mind them much, as they had drunk too much, and asks them to leave right away, leaving the brat completely outraged that she had defended Lin right in front of him. In the parking lot, the brat was showing off with his little car, bragging too much, even saying that he would buy a Lamborghini when he got rich. The divine lady comments that she remembers remembered that his favorite car in college was a Pagani Zonda, and he says that because of the value of the Pagani, even if he worked his whole life, he would never be able to buy one day. Speaking of the Pagani, his friend notices that there was one parked right next to his car, and he goes to check out the car of his dreams that was right in front of him. After a while, the protagonist asks if he was done looking, and the boy thought that he actually wanted to see it too. However, when our protagonist asks his divine lady to get into his car, they ended up with their jaws dropped, especially upon realizing that that beautiful car actually belonged to a simple blah-blah driver. And finally, he leaves the presence of toxic people with his beautiful damsel. Inside the car, Miss D apologizes to him for her colleagues, as she didn't imagine they would be so snobbish. But he didn't care much about it and asked if she would like him to take her home. However, since she had had a little to drink, she would like to go to the beach to sober up, even saying that she would even change the destination. But he lets it go since it didn't hurt to change the route to get some fresh air. His new task was to get 10 5-star reviews, and with those it would be his 7th positive review, and they finally arrive at the beach. She then asked him to turn to the other side so that she could take off her stockings, but he thought she would do something else. However, let's just say that he kind of refused to turn at first, and she felt forced to pinch him so that he wouldn't look at her. My friends, I believe I don't need to comment on this image, an unparalleled beauty in the manuals, and honestly, I think this was the most beautiful character I've seen so far. Finally, she was ready for them to take a walk on the beach, and comments that her parents kept insisting that she go to her grandfather's birthday. When she was about to ask something, he had kind of already anticipated her question, and asks if she would like him to pretend to be her boyfriend, and right after he accepts, saying that he could take care of it for her, since she had worked so hard on the squats earlier. When she saw the lights of the Kyushu pavilion all lit up, she was quite impressed, since due to its extremely high price, the pavilion had never been sold before. Therefore, it was the first time she had seen it all lit up at night, and Lin said he would drive a little closer to show her the place, and even said that if she liked it, she could sleep there if she wanted. We continue with Miss D, thinking it would be a dream to sleep in the Kyushu residence, and with that, the protagonist decided to show her a few more things. Arriving at the entrance, she mentions that she participated in the bidding for that land at the beginning, although the result was later annulled. Anyway, as she was also the president of a company, he said she didn't need to feel envious, but she tries to disguise it by saying that the indoor pool used mineral water transported by air, and for that reason, she was actually curious. Lin holds her hand, saying he would show her what it was like inside then, since she wanted to see. Afraid of being caught, she was content with just observing from the outside, but the protagonist asks her what he would get if he actually managed to get her inside. She says that she would wear a bikini and put on a great show for him, which honestly only made his motivation increase even more so he could get his reward. They go inside the Kyushu pavilion. Admired by how easy it was to get in, she even wondered where the place's security was, since it was supposed to be the highest level of security around. Arriving inside, she notices a fruit tree nearby, and to get even closer to her, he asks if she would like to pick some, but she gently refuses. When she sees the pool, she is impressed by its beauty, and since they managed to see the pool, it was time for Miss Jai to keep her promise. Or at least it would be, if she had a bikini with her there and knew how to swim too. Therefore, it was better for them to talk about it later. With no options to refuse, he ended up accepting what she said, and she says that she would keep her word and they would come back there so she could pay him. At one point, he asks if she wouldn't like to take a look at the inside of the house, but as she was already afraid of being caught, she thought it better to stay right there. But since there was no one in the villa, he tells her not to be afraid and to come in. After that, her surprise was enormous when he touched the door and was welcomed into his home, only then revealing that the house was actually his all along, which only made her scold him for having deceived her all this time. While she admired the interior of the house, she asked how much he had spent there, and he replies that he had spent a few billion. Thinking he was trying to deceive her again, she says that the most expensive villa there was only 1.2 billion, unless he had bought the entire Kyushu pavilion, and he finally reveals that he had indeed bought it. As she had never seen anything like it before, she asks if he happened to have some kind of money tree, but since he couldn't reveal anything about the system he had, he decided to remain silent, although it was easier than having a money tree itself. Now more at ease, she decides to sit on the comfortable and luxurious sofa of the residence. With that, he says that he wouldn't take her home so late at night, therefore she could choose one of the rooms to stay in, and she ends up accepting the protagonist's generous offer. When she asks if he had women's pajamas there, he obviously answers no, because it wouldn't make much sense if he did. However, he says that he wouldn't peek at her, so she could sleep however she felt most comfortable, which ended up making her even more embarrassed. He decided to go upstairs to see if he had any pajamas for her. While she was in the shower, she ended up slipping and asks him to come in for a bit as she had fallen. Worried about her, he asks if Miss G had been hurt, and to his surprise when he enters the bathroom, she says that she had hurt her ankle and asked for his help to take a shower. Since the protagonist doesn't mess around, I imagine you've already figured out what kind of support he gave her. To be honest, I believe she really slipped on something now, if you know what I mean. The next morning, she wakes him up in a hurry, as she would be late if he decided to sleep any longer. And she says that if he got up soon and took her to work, she would give him 5 stars. After dropping off Miss G, Lin remembers that he hadn't eaten anything yet, so he decided to take a break for breakfast. Clearly, he had gone to the place he owned, but as he didn't want to disturb anything, he tells his general manager that he would be there discreetly, without revealing to the employees who he really was. As soon as he enters, he calls a waitress to be served, and to his surprise, the waitress who came to serve him was precisely the manager who had fired him in Chapter 1. Then, she starts humiliating the protagonist again, saying that she never thought she would find scum like him there. Outraged by the treatment he received, he starts arguing with her, and once again she starts humiliating him, saying that if it weren't for the relationship he had with a rich woman, he would never be able to afford to eat there. Soon one of the employees says that it was better for her to stop saying those things, but the new manager completely ignored the girl's warning and continued to say things that shouldn't be said to Lin. To prevent the situation from getting even worse, he orders the employee to go get the general manager, but the new manager continued with the non-stop humiliations until he asks if she couldn't learn from her own mistake, saying that out of respect for an old colleague, he would still let this mistake of hers slide. Next, the general manager arrives, and she tells him to call the security guards to kick him out, as he was poor and trying to cause trouble. However, the one who got a scolding this time was her, and the manager says that he was the owner of that place. Therefore, if anyone should be kicked out, it should be her. As she still didn't believe what the manager had just told her, she says that he must have been deceived in some way, since Lin was her former co-worker. But apparently the one who had deceived someone there was her, and he wonders how a person like her actually managed to pass their interview. As if that wasn't enough, the manager says that he would also blacklist her, which would completely end her career, as no company would hire her anymore. After this whole show, she was carried out by the security guards, apologizing to Lin for having acted that way with him. After solving the problem with the bitter woman, the general manager apologizes for the inconvenience to his boss's meal, and the protagonist gladly accepts, just asking him to do a more detailed analysis the next time he hires someone. After that, he receives an unknown call on his cell phone, and upon answering, it was the senior vice president of blah blah, named Tian Yang. She would like to get to know him better, so she asked him when it would be possible for him to have some time for them to talk. However, as he had a job to do in the morning, he would contact her later, and with that, she ends up agreeing to talk to him later. When her assistant asks if Lin had agreed to meet with her, the vice president says what he had said. Therefore, she would visit one of her colleagues that morning. Upon hearing her superior's objectives, her assistant decides to call the driver to take him to the location. To her surprise, little did she know that this driver would be precisely who she was looking for all this time. He then receives a ride request on his app, and clearly he decides to accept it, as it was very close to him. Arriving there, he meets the vice president and her assistant, and upon asking if she was the Mrs. Tian who had requested the driver, she replies yes, but in her thoughts she clearly admired our protagonist's beauty. When Lin calls her to get into his car, she was impressed that he was the blah blah driver, and even the assistant was wondering when their company had become so powerful. As he didn't have much time, he asks the beautiful lady to get into his car again. As soon as she gets in, she asks if he was just there to enjoy life, and says that many girls must find it all interesting to say the least. He then asks if there was any rule in the company that said he couldn't have a supercar to be their driver, and she says yes, he could, but he had to be careful with what he said and did. After all, he could end up being suspended for defaming the company. When he asks if she had that much power to suspend his license at any time, she finally revealed herself to be the senior president of blah blah. Apparently, he hadn't quite believed what she said, and reveals to her that he is a shareholder of blah blah. Soon she decides to show her vice president card, proving that she really held that position, and he says that he hadn't lied to her either, because the day before he had bought 21% of their company's shares. And she had called him just a little while ago, saying she wanted to meet him, and only then did she find out that he was Lin. Following that, she apologizes for having offended him in any way, asking him to give her a chance to sit down and talk with him when that ride was over. He says that he needed to finish some rides first, making her ask him to get in touch when he was finally free. At the end of their ride, she was unable to make the payment to the protagonist, and only then did he receive a message on his cell phone, saying that because he had violated one of the company's regulations, his license had been suspended, thus realizing that it was possibly the guy who had called him before who had made this suspension. The place he had taken Miss Tian was precisely the company that had just suspended his license. While she was thinking that they were offending one of their company's main shareholders, the protagonist thought that it had been the Jinx who had called to complain to the platform again. Tian then said for him not to worry, as she would take care of that matter soon and his license would be back shortly, but he ended up deciding to go with her to personally investigate the situation. Without thinking twice, Vice, they storm the meeting room, and he soon reveals who he was, saying that they had suspended his license and he was there to talk to him. The president then passes the responsibility to the operations manager, who soon begins to say that he was a very arrogant young man for having the courage to show up there after acting in that manner, also saying that he had called security for him. Tired of hearing nonsense, the protagonist decided to sit down and pass the floor to Miss Tian, who soon said that the suspension would be lifted, and the manager shouldn't have even investigated better before suspending him. Thus, as vice president of blah blah, she was removing him from the position of operations manager of that company. Only when she shows her identification card did they really believe that she was in fact the vice president. The operations manager begins to explain himself, trying to find an excuse to justify his action and block the protagonist's license, which made her ask if he had at least investigated the passenger he had possibly insulted. Furthermore, Lin had just bought 21% of blah blah's shares, becoming the second largest shareholder of the company. Therefore, she didn't believe he would insult a passenger. They then said that he was just the blah blah driver, not believing that that was really true. However, Tian soon tells them to shut up, as Lin was on his way to get to know their company better when they precisely blocked his license. After all this confusion, she decided to cancel their operating company's status, causing the president to tell his manager to apologize to Lin, and so he did, apologizing for his previous attitude. However, the protagonist ended up refusing his apology, as according to his recent actions, it seemed that over the years many had been intimidated by him. Therefore, as a shareholder of blah blah, he approved of Tian's decision, and their operator was disqualified. Soon he receives a call from Miss G and asked the vice president to take care of the rest, as he needed to take that call. Upon answering, she says that the next day would be her grandfather's birthday, so they would go out to buy some clothes for her and for him too, and he accepts, saying that he would pick her up in the evening. With that, he thinks that he couldn't go empty-handed to her grandfather's birthday and wonders what the old man would like to get. The vice president then returns, saying that his license had been unblocked again and that he had also received maximum access. As he hadn't had this access before, he asks if drivers have different permissions, and she says they are just a few more auxiliary functions. However, one of these functions was precisely to allow users to make a request by searching for his license plate number and to specify the request they would like to make. From the way he reacted to this, he found this type of feature very useful, and then says that he had a birthday to go to, so he asked if she knew a good place that sold old paintings. She then asks if a painting by Zanda Qian was good enough for him, which ended up surprising him that she had access to that painting. I also don't really know what kind of painting this is or who it's by, but that doesn't make much difference to us. She then says that their president had managed to get a copy of this painting, and if he wanted it, she would send her assistant to get it right away. He then gladly accepts her painting and asks how much it would be, but she wouldn't accept money from him, as he was their second largest shareholder. He asked them to send the painting to the manager of the Peninsula Hotel. As Lin didn't like to owe people favors, he says he would give her 1% of his assets in exchange for this painting, so they would be even. Clearly, she was surprised by his generosity, as just 1% of his assets was equivalent to about 500 million yuan, which was their currency. After that, he says goodbye, saying that she could continue to operate in the same way as she was, and that he would not interfere in her work. She then says that their president would like to invite him to visit them in Yangshan, and the protagonist replies that he would go there soon, so he would contact her when the time came. Then thinking that it had been a long time since he had last visited the orphanage there, and he needed to find time to make a new visit. After the end of this ride, he finally received another 5-star review and receives a new ride request on his app to take the person exactly to his hotel. At this moment, we see a young lady who would be a headache for him soon, named Yang Cheng Shin. As soon as he pulls the Pagani up next to her, she asks who he was, and he replies that he was the blah blah driver she had requested. As soon as she gets into the beautiful Pagani, she mentions that his company was very good for having thought of such an original marketing technique. However, he says that the car was really his, and that wasn't their idea, but apparently she hadn't believed what he said, thinking that he thought she was a naive little girl and had never seen the world yet. Realizing that she would be a real problem for him, he decides to ignore her comments and finish that ride quickly. With that, he decided to make a small detour, but she ended up thinking that he had done it just so she would pay more at the end, although shortly after he said that he frequented that place often, and therefore knew a shortcut to get there faster. However, the annoying girl again then thought that he had done it just to increase the value of the ride so she would pay more for it. At the end of the ride, as soon as he parks his Pagani in front of the hotel, he realizes that she probably had a case with one of his employees, as she didn't even want to enter through the front entrance, and it doesn't take long for him to receive a 1-star review from her. As he didn't want to stress too much about it, he decided to go pick up Miss G, and soon he manages to meet up with her, but already reminding her that she hadn't yet left the 5-star review after they finished the ride, and she then says that it would depend on his performance on that specific day. With that, he ended up acting even better with her, even offering to carry the bags she had. When they arrive in front of a bikini shop, she decides to stop there to buy one, and he tells her that after shopping, she would be able to fulfill her promise made on the day they were at his pavilion, and she replies that she wouldn't have made that promise if she had known that he was actually the owner of the place. However, as he hadn't forced her to do anything, now she would have to face the consequences. It doesn't take long for one of the attendants to come and serve them, and in the end, she asked them to finish their shopping there. Surprised by her attitude, he asks why she hadn't bought anything for herself, and the divine lady replies that none of them fit, so he should just buy his, and they would leave. But if she decided not to buy, then he wouldn't buy anything there either, also asking if she didn't like their styles. But apparently the real reason was not that, but that she hadn't found her size there. The attendant then says that they had sizes from A to D, but since Miss D wore a size E, they didn't have anything in her size. With this comment, he ended up making the divine lady embarrassed, and he says that if they didn't have it there, they just had to go to the other store next to that one, as they would probably have something in her size there. Arriving there, they are impressed with the outfit that was in the window, or at least he was. As that outfit was somewhat out of the ordinary, she pulls him away completely embarrassed, so that they could finally do their shopping. As soon as they enter, she asks the saleswoman where their bikinis were, and it doesn't take long for Miss D to be taken to the latest models they had. As she hadn't worn anything like that before, it seems she was a little embarrassed by those models, and in the end, she ended up bringing a more conservative model for Lin to give his opinion as well. And the protagonist's opinion was precisely that that model would not be enough to show the true strength she had. With that, he gave her the idea of wearing a model a little more appropriate for the divine lady, and with a lot of cuteness in her heart and embarrassment too, she ends up accepting, then asking the attendant to improvise that model in size E. But he decided to take the one she had liked before as well. When she says that she thought he hadn't liked that model, he replies that he actually liked it a lot, but the model she liked, she would use to go out and have fun. But the one he showed her first was for her to wear only in front of him. And from her little face, you could already see that she was enjoying all of this. After that, she decides to go to the 4th floor to buy some custom dresses this time. Right from the start, she was enchanted with one of the dresses that was on display, and while the protagonist waited for his divine lady, she soon appears asking him to go to the fitting room where she was. When he says that it wouldn't make a good impression if he went in there, she replies that she only asked him to help her tighten the zipper in the back. After all, she couldn't do it alone. And with a side comment in this scene, I believe our protagonist is a bit undecided about what he should have actually done at this moment, as the view was completely stunning. When he asks if she wasn't showing a little too much, she said she had a shawl to cover her back. However, he was still in doubt that that was really a size E, as it looked more like a size F, which ended up making her embarrassed with the comment he had just made. When she finally finishes getting dressed, he says that that dress looked great on her, so since he had liked it, she decided to keep it. While the attendant was saying that she felt that that dress was made for her, another customer arrives with his companion in the background. Soon the gold digger, who we'll call Sang Suga here, told her companion that she would like a dress like that too. And so he asked the attendant to bring the same dress for her, but as that was the only piece they had because it was custom made, he could look at other styles. But the guy ended up being arrogant and says that from the appearance of the protagonist and the divine lady, they wouldn't be able to afford that dress. Therefore, he would take it in their place. But soon, the divine lady appears, annoyed with the comment the strange man had just made. Sang Suga then asks if she could really afford the price of that outfit, as it cost more than 80,000, and the beautiful divine lady replies that she could certainly pay for it herself, unlike her, leaving the girl completely outraged with her answer, although the divine lady hadn't told any lies, as the girl was really just taking money from the guy. Soon the simp says that he would add 20,000 to her commission if she sold that dress to him, but that was not in accordance with the establishment's rules. Thus, the protagonist would add 200,000. Furthermore, if he looked at the size of the dress, he would say that it wouldn't fit his companion. After all, the girl looked like a board compared to the divine lady. And in the end, he ended up giving up on buying that dress, especially when he saw that he would just be spending money for nothing. Because he had defended the beautiful damsel, she said that he would receive a great reward later. This time it was his turn to try on a suit to go to the party, and the girls in the background were completely enchanted by him, even thinking that it was a shame he wasn't an intern. When he asks what the divine divine lady thought, she replies that it was already good, because she was afraid that the young women would get dizzy if he decided to try on a few more outfits. And after that, they finally decide to leave, although he was eager to finally receive his reward. Later at his residence in the pavilion, Lin was delighting in the beautiful sun that was hovering over him, until suddenly an even better view appears in front of him, completely illuminating his day, his night, and the rest of the year too. Apparently it wasn't just him who was enchanted, as the beautiful damsel was also impressed with his appearance. Realizing that she was looking at him a lot, he asks if she was liking what she was seeing, and she clearly responds embarrassed, trying to disguise her gaze. She mentions that since she had already put on the bikini, she had already fulfilled her promise. Lin then wastes no time and says that he loved people like her, who kept their word. Following that, he pulls her to swim, but initially she ended up grabbing him, asking him not to let go, as she didn't know how to swim. He then comforts her, saying that he wouldn't let her go, and asks if she would like him to teach her how to swim, and apparently the divine lady ended up accepting his proposal. But as she was afraid of drowning, she asked him not to let her go in the water. Soon the swimming lessons would begin, but he says that he wouldn't be able to move if she kept squeezing him like that. After relaxing a bit, she finally feels calmer to be able to start the lessons, and when she thought she was doing very well, she ends up despairing in the middle of swimming, causing her to sink. However, as he is a man of his word, he kept his promise and went after her to save her. And let's just say he passed some of his air to her so she could breathe underwater. And my friends, what a beautiful scene we have here. I believe that this alone is enough to say that the manhwa is worth reading. When he asks if she was scared, she replies that with him around it didn't seem so scary, and after that, he gives the divine lady a big hug. But I clearly don't need to say what came next, do I? Later, while she was bathing, he asked to use her cell phone, and she gave him the password so he could use it. While he was on the divine lady's cell phone, he ended up receiving a visit from the system girl again, who said that he had already managed to complete 75% of his career, therefore his reward was the 1 Jean-Pierre. Basically, this was the second largest cruise ship terminal. As he had already completed a good part of his career, he was not far from unlocking his next profession, and he thinks that if he continued at this pace, he would be able to unlock the next profession before the previously scheduled deadline. Soon, the beautiful deity appears, saying that because of him, she hadn't been able to learn how to swim, but since that was his house, she could go there whenever she wanted, and next time he would really teach her how to do it. We now see an old bed quilt, and he says that that was actually because he had come from the orphanage, so he was used to using them, and that's why he didn't want to throw them away. After this revelation, she asks if he was an orphan, and he then says that according to Ogmar, when he was born, he had been taken to an orphanage, and that's where he had grown up. She soon apologizes for making him remember something so painful, but he didn't care much about it. When he was a child, this person named Ogmar took care of him and treated him as if he were her son, and he had many friends by his side, so it seemed that he had had a lot of fun as a child. Then she said she was going to bed, and if he could get up early and take her to work, they could go out later and go to her grandfather's birthday party in the afternoon. And he ends up accepting, as he would love to take her to work every day, so he could complete his mission more quickly too. We continue with our protagonist receiving a sudden call on his cell phone, and when he answers, it was precisely Ogmar, the woman who had raised him. She mentions that she found out that he had broken up with his ex-girlfriend, and ends up recommending a girl he could meet. After all, she was practically the same age as him. Out of respect for her, perhaps, he ended up agreeing to meet the girl, and she had arranged a meeting with them the next morning. When the time for the meeting came, he was there to talk to the girl that Ogmar had recommended, and he quickly manages to find the girl and her family. Soon a woman greets him, and this was the mother of the girl he had gone to meet. She mentions that she found out that he worked in a real estate agency, but when he said he had been fired, the reaction of the leeches there already showed a slight contempt for Lin. Already thinking that he was an unemployed person, he says that he was a blah-blah driver and could barely pay his bills, which only made her contempt increase even more. Soon she begins to praise her daughter and her qualities, and already demands that he buy an apartment in Zongai. The girl then starts to think she's the last Coke in the desert, saying that it was no big deal if he really wanted her, and our protagonist ended up deciding to play their game. One of the relatives says that he would have to pay a dowry for the bride of 88,000 just for good luck. When he thinks that this was too much of an exaggeration, the girl's mother mentions the fact that a colleague of her daughter's had received a dowry of 1,600,000. When he mentions that she was practically selling her daughter, apparently she didn't like his comment very much, but he asks her to continue with the robbery. Now it was her brother's mother's turn to ask for something, and it was precisely an imported car worth more than $500,000 according to him, cheap even. The total sum of everything would be almost $10 million, and Lin asks if they really think he would be able to get all that money. When the girl's mother makes a comment about how young people could get married without depending on their family, he gives her a threatening look, saying that his parents were dead. Her brother had heard that the orphanage would be relocated, and when the land was sold, he would get a share of that value. Finally, after they show their true faces, Lin throws the hot tea he was drinking on the scum of society, thus revealing that he was just playing with them, but in the end, they just wanted to use the money he would receive. As Lin was leaving, the scum's mother was worried about her leech son, who said he would not spare our protagonist. It doesn't take long for him to grab a flower pot to throw at Lin, but he missed by a very small margin. The protagonist then says that the consequences for his actions today could be very serious, especially because even though the pot didn't hit him, the spoiled brat managed to scratch his car, leaving them with a fear that wouldn't even let air pass in certain areas. When the insolent one starts admiring the Pagani he had, Lin replies by telling him the value of the car and the cost of $2 million for the repaint, also asking how they would pay. The woman's attitude changed completely upon seeing the car he had, but Lin was not impressed by her sudden interest. He gave them an ultimatum, telling them to get the $2 million or they would receive a court summons. When he leaves, the snake's mother starts fighting with her daughter, blaming her for him leaving, and even the spoiled little boy starts blaming her, as if he hadn't done anything. Lin then decided to visit his newly acquired pier, and he comes across the operations manager being deceived by a girl who didn't want to pay for the damage she had done to one of the boats. Or rather, she wanted to pay in another way, if you could tell from this image. The protagonist, upon seeing that, asks if he would really let her go without paying for the damages. Obviously, the manager ended up being very ignorant with Lin, and he replies that since he was the manager, if she didn't pay, the money would come out of his pocket then, and finally leaves. Soon he arrives at the location to talk to the employees and introduce himself as the new owner of the place as well. And finally, the receptionist takes him to the meeting room. Arriving there, the executives received him relatively well, but it seemed that the operations manager was missing, who was apparently busy with something else. Quickly, the boss there asks the receptionist to go call the manager as soon as possible, and 5 minutes later the guy from before arrives. When he sees that Lin was the new president of the company, he doesn't know where to put his face, even apologizing and saying that he would compensate him, asking for another chance. But now it was too late, and he asks the general manager to remove the simp from there. After that, he tells his executives that he wanted to modernize the pier, but as they were already in second place, one of them didn't think this change was necessary. However, our protagonist was not content with being in second place, and what's more, he would give them a raise too, which ended up exciting everyone there to work on improvements. Leaving the company, he receives a message from the manager of the Peninsula Hotel saying that someone had delivered a painting to him. In addition, he receives a call saying that the watch he had ordered before was also ready for delivery. When he says that he didn't have time and asks them to send it to the Kyushu Pavilion, unfortunately they couldn't do that. Due to the high value of the product, they could only deliver it exactly to the person who bought it, and he asks them to send it to the location where Miss G's grandfather's party would be. During the night, he finally goes to her grandfather's celebration, and the divine lady soon greets him, but let's just say she was embarrassed by him looking where he shouldn't. Upon entering the hall, people began to admire the couple's presence, and they finally arrive at the table where her grandfather was. Unfortunately for Lin, he ended up meeting the annoying girl from before, saying that he was just the blah-blah driver, and saying that the protagonist had tried to deceive her. Clearly, the divine lady didn't believe her words, and apparently, the grandfather didn't like what he had just heard. Even with Miss G trying to explain that the car was really his, the girl continued to say negative things about Lin. When one of the girls says to let the blue girl's boyfriend see if he's a liar or not, the Naja introduces the new simp she had. Clearly, he decided to defend her, saying that Lin was just a blah-blah driver. When the divine lady's father asks what was happening, she explains that Lin was not a fraud, and her grandfather had just asked the security guards to remove him from there. Until suddenly, the delivery men for the watch that the protagonist had bought arrive. Upon seeing the limited edition watch he had bought, only then did the simp and the rattlesnake realize they were wrong about Lin. After that, the grandfather tells his granddaughter to apologize for the mistake she had made, but the rattlesnake's mother appeared to defend the scum of society. Upon hearing her aunt's words, the divine lady did not remain silent, as she realized that she was just jealous of her boyfriend. Soon, the couple of scum gives the gift to the grandfather, and it was a collection of Qing dynasty coins, valued at over $2 million. The divine lady then decides to take a gift from her bag, saying that that was the protagonist's gift for the grandfather, who ends up receiving it gladly, even though it was simple. However, Lin says that she didn't need to lie for him, and that he had indeed brought a gift for the family's grandfather. Apparently, Even she didn't quite believe that he had brought a gift, and soon he hands over the painting he had just received. The old man was then amazed by Zandakia's work of art, and the price of that painting was at least 200 million. She saw nothing special in the painting, openly wondering if it was worth the price. The old man simply stated that the painting held a meaning that was not visible to the ordinary eye. The simp then says that he was being deceived, as they offered 230 million for the same painting to his manager, and he didn't want to sell. The rattlesnake then begins to annoy the divine lady on purpose, but she was sure that Lin would not deceive people with a fake painting. The scumbag then decides to tear up that very expensive painting in front of everyone, stating that that work was a fake, also saying that this was a rule of the ancient world. The beautiful damsel ended up being outraged with him, but Lin soon comforts her, saying that he would take care of it. The protagonist says that the simp's qualification to operate had just been withdrawn, but apparently he didn't quite believe his words. Only then does he reveal that he has 20% of blah blah's shares and had the right to remove him from the company. Even the divine lady said that now was not the time to joke, and asks if he really had those shares, if she would reward him later, leaving Miss G completely embarrassed afterwards. After that, he tells the scumbag to call his manager, asking if he knew any Lin, and so he did, saying that he would even put the cell phone on speaker so that the protagonist's lies would be exposed. When the manager answers the phone, she tells the simp to welcome Mr. Lin well. When he mentions that Lin had said that he only had 20% of the shares, she says that was because she had given the Zandaki painting to Lin, and as he didn't want to take advantage of her, he gave her 1% of the shares. With that, the human scum ended up on the floor upon realizing the huge mistake he had just made. And as the second largest shareholder, Lin removed the simp's operational qualifications. The snake says that he didn't need to go too far, as it was her grandfather's birthday. Even the rattlesnake's mother joins the conversation, saying that he had no consideration for the family. Lin just replies that if it had been the divine lady who had asked, he would have done it right away, but since it was a mere disposable being like her, he had no reason to do so. From the grandfather's state, not even he wanted the protagonist to have pity at that moment. He then asks how the simp would compensate for the 200 million painting he had just torn up, and soon he begins to beg for another chance. The simp even ran to the rattlesnake asking for help, but here she ended up saying that they had nothing to do with each other anymore. The scumbag, afraid of what would happen now, even clings to her, begging her not to abandon him, and Lin, upon seeing that, says that it wasn't worth humiliating himself for a woman like that. After that, the protagonist tells Miss G's father to gather the family, as he had something to say to all of them. In the living room, the grandfather asks what mystery it was that he was hiding, and even the rattlesnake asked him to just say what he wanted, and so he did, saying that she was meeting with 2 people at the hotel he owned. In addition, he had some videos on his cell phone to prove what she was actually doing there. Upon showing the proof to the grandfather, he quickly became indignant at the lack of shame his granddaughter had. She even tries to explain, saying that she had only gone to talk about business, but receives a good slap in the face afterwards. The rattlesnake's mother again tries to defend her daughter, but this time she ended up receiving a scolding from Miss G's father. And finally, Lin decides to leave with the divine lady, as they had a lot to talk about. Outside, she thanks him, and he just asked her to make more ride requests to compensate him, but she ended up thinking he would ask for something more difficult, showing us a somewhat disappointed face. As there would be no more birthday banquet, he decided to accept a few more rides to finish his mission quickly. We now have a view of a beautiful teenager, who was apparently being bothered by a guy who was interested in her. But as she wasn't interested in going with him, she said that the car she had just called would soon arrive there. It really didn't take long, and soon the protagonist stops his car in front of her, asking if she was the young lady who had made the request on the blah blah app. When she replies yes, he asks her to get in, as he was the driver she was waiting for, and so she did, leaving the guy who was interested in her with his face on the floor. Inside the car, she asked why he still did ride since he had a beautiful car, and he just replies that the car didn't matter. What was important was making money on your own. Arriving at her destination, she asked to add him on the neighboring social network, and he asks why she wanted to add him there. When she asks if he believed in love at first sight, he says that she was very innocent, especially since he could clearly be a bad guy, so it was better for her to be more careful. And when she gets out of the car, he thinks that girls these days were too naive. He then receives a call from the girl who was trying to get money from him before, asking him to pick her up the next day. Lin then asks if she had already gotten the 2 million to repair his car, and that the next day he would go get the money. She then tells him to stop with those jokes and that the other day they were just testing him. Since he had passed the family's test, he and she were now a couple. Apparently, he didn't much like the loose screws this girl has in her head, and responds rudely to her, saying that if they didn't pay the compensation for scratching his car, they would receive a court summons. A short time later, we see that the girl he had gone to pick up was precisely the streamer from the other video. She was going to the international circuit, which he also owned. An official event would take place there, and she was going to try to do a live broadcast there. While they were going to the circuit, she had the idea of feeding him while he drove, and of course, he liked that. Arriving there, he also became curious to see the reason for all that commotion, and decided to go in with her as well. As soon as they enter, they already find two rival streamers having a confrontation. Miss Yu decided to ask what was happening, and the young man replies that the girl in front of him was trying to get rid of him and Yu. But according to her, it was the owner of the racetrack himself who had said that only one presenter was needed. As the racetrack was too big, all of them could broadcast peacefully, but still, that wasn't enough for her, and she actually wanted them to leave. Then a person arrives saying that everything was ready for them to enter, and with that, she says goodbye, asking her rivals to leave, since they didn't have much to do now. Unfortunately, that was the only choice they had at the moment, but Lin soon arrives taking charge, saying that they could stay there to broadcast. Outraged with the protagonist, the girl from before tells him to forget it, and if he dared to mess with Kim Chow, he would lose his life without knowing it. With that, Lin decided to challenge her, telling her to go call Kim if her mother was a man then. Yu tries to calm the protagonist down, saying that they wouldn't broadcast there anymore, so he didn't need to be angry, but he gently refuses her offer to calm down, saying that he would make sure that the two of them did the live stream there. When the young man asks who he was, she also didn't know how to answer very well, but she still believed that she could trust him, regardless of what he did. The young man also decided to trust his friend's instincts and go with Lin. Arriving there, we see several luxury cars parked, ready to race, and both streamers from before were impressed with the perfection of those machines. After that, Lin says that with him there, no one could kick them out, and it doesn't take long for Kim Chow and the manager to arrive along with the girl from before. She then plays the victim and tries to get Kim to kick them out of the place. Quickly, the manager welcomes him very well. When she sees that even Kim knew the guy she thought was a nobody, she asks if he knew that person, who in this case is our protagonist. He then responds rudely to the girl, saying that he was the owner of the Zungai circuit. Lin then asks if she was his friend, since she had been very rude to him a little while ago, but Kim soon replies that she was just some random girl and was going to send her away right now. She then asks him not to kick her out, as her career would be over if he did that. But as he knew Lin's character well, he knew that if she didn't give in, he would never kick her out, and after that, she was carried out by the security guards. Kim asks if that girl was his new companion, and also if Lin wouldn't like him to introduce some foreign girls to him. However, he ended up leaving all that fun just for Kim, leaving the young man from before surprised with the way he treated even Kim, thinking that the protagonist was very powerful in a way. After that, the young man suggests that they have a race on that new track, and he ended up accepting. Before starting the race, Kim suggested that they make a bet to make things more interesting. Basically, they would have to pay a 100,000 difference per second at the end of the race, and Lin once again agrees to bet with him. Soon they start racing, but there still wasn't much of a chance for young Kim, as the protagonist won against him once again. In the end, the young man pays 2 million with a heavy heart, already tired of losing to him. With that, the protagonist asked the manager to take that money and have his car repainted because of the previous scratch. In addition, he asked the streamers to continue broadcasting as well, as he needed to leave soon to do the rides, and the beautiful Yu thanks him for his help. Kim then asks what he was doing, since he had a beautiful streamer right in front of him, but he still wanted to continue with the rides, and Lin asks if he wanted to participate too, but the young man ended up gently refusing his offer. Leaving the racetrack, he realizes that there were only 3 more requests left, and he would be able to finish that mission. Following this, Lin decided to pay a visit to his aunt, to eat the food she made. She, surprised by his visit, says that she had to pick up her daughter from school, but still asks what he would like to eat, and she would quickly prepare something for him. He then replies that he would pick up her daughter for her, and she could take care of making the food calmly. Arriving at the place, he ended up waiting for 20 minutes and still no sign of the girl coming out, until he asks a little girl if the students were still in school. However, it seems they had all been released. He then decides to go inside, and soon comes across a small commotion happening in her classroom. He then notices the presence of a beautiful teacher, and if I'm not mistaken, it seems he knows her from somewhere. In addition, the mother of one of the students was putting on a beautiful show of secondhand embarrassment. All this just because the young girl had hit his face, but it was he who had mistreated the little one first. Otherwise, she wouldn't have done that. Lin then arrives stealing the scene, saying that with the face her son had, he wouldn't even have a chance to enter the entertainment industry he wanted. From the beautiful teacher's reaction, she seems to know the protagonist too, and he asks what had happened for her to be stuck there until this hour. The girl then decides to show her clothes that had been torn by her classmate. Therefore, the culprit there was the spoiled brat who had nothing better to do. But still, the snake says that if they didn't pay them compensation today, this wouldn't end well. The girl, almost in tears, says that it was the young man who had bullied her first, and the Naja found nothing wrong with her son's attitude in bullying her, and even insults the girl, saying that she had to endure it in silence for being poor. This arrogant attitude made Lin lose his patience, and he does a Will Smith and gives a good slap to the face of the rattlesnake. Outraged by his attitude, she even comments on how he dared to hit her, but you could already see who that insignificant one took after. The old woman then decided to offend the girl's teacher this time, saying that she would resort to her husband to resolve this situation. With that, the beautiful teacher replies, saying that this was all her fault, and even if she went to court, it would be of no use. The disgusting old woman, still wanting to be in the right, threatened the entire school this time, but the teacher still says that they could leave, and she would take care of the current situation. However, before they left, the spoiled little boy's father arrived, and the baby told his daddy who it was that had hit his mother's rattlesnake. Now it was the old man's turn to be embarrassed, saying that his boss was Kim Young, and if he messed with him, there would be no way for Lin to live in Songhai anymore. Realizing who the guy's boss was, Lin decided to make a call to Kim, asking who his company's manager was who wanted him to kneel, even after having won the bet. Kim even thought Lin was joking, but we recently saw that all of this was true. He then told the protagonist that he would find out who the idiot was who was doing this and would certainly give him an explanation. The guy from before asks who he had called, and upon replying that it was precisely Kim Young, he didn't believe what the protagonist said, and what's more, he even thought that Lin had made it all up. Until suddenly his cell phone rings, and upon answering, it was precisely Kim who asked how he dared to provoke Lin, and orders him to take all his things and leave that company immediately. After that, his tough guy pose completely fell apart, and he says that he would apologize to Lin right away. At that moment, the guy was completely floored, as he had just taken out a loan to buy a house and a car. The rattlesnake then asks what happened for him to be on his knees on the floor, and he replies saying that he had just been fired by Kim himself. After that, he begged Lin to give him another chance, asking him not to let Kim fire him, but the protagonist didn't say anything about it and just kicked the human scum. It was a good thing that he had gone to pick her up instead of her mother, otherwise, who knows how much they would have been bullied by them. And he tells them to get out of there and become better people. Arriving at the place, the young girl was about to say what happened at school and how Lin acted, but he gently asked the little one to be silent about it, and she understood that that was to be just their secret. He continued with Lin going to visit the divine lady at her workplace. Arriving there, he realizes that even late at night, she was the only one still at work doing overtime, even though she was in danger. When he sees her eating her cookies, I confess that I found this little glutton too cute. Then he decides to play a tasteless prank on her, making the divine lady jump in fright. A short time later, she ended up locking herself inside her office and calls our protagonist, asking him to pick her up at her workplace. However, Lin ended up refusing her request, saying that he was now working out of town. Still, the beautiful damsel ended up saying that she was very afraid of something being there in the company, and he finally asks her to wait right there. A few seconds later, she hears a knock on the door and runs to say that her boyfriend would be there soon. Therefore, that person should leave immediately. As soon as she realizes that the previous voice was precisely her boyfriend's, she runs into the protagonist's arms, telling him what had just happened. When she finally realized how quickly he arrived there, he decided to tell her that he was outside the whole time. With that, she ended up fighting with him for playing such a tasteless prank on her. To calm the divine lady's heart, he says that he did it just to show her how dangerous it was for her to be working so late at night alone. After that, he takes out a container of fried rice that he had gotten from his aunt earlier. It doesn't take long for her to recognize whose rice that was, since even though she was a multimillionaire, she also liked to eat at outdoor stalls. As he had just scared her, the beautiful damsel decided to give him a punishment, where basically he would have to feed her. And let's just say that this ended up being more of a reward than an actual punishment. It was already late at night, so as soon as she finished eating, he would take her home. This only made the divine lady's admiration for him grow even more, as other guys at this time would be getting ready to go clubbing, and he was the only one who actually thought of her to pick her up from work. Soon, Lin ended up receiving a call from Kim, who said that he had arranged for some girls who were probably the protagonist type, but with a beautiful angelic vision by his side, Lin replies that there was no girl he could arrange that would be better than Miss G. Doubting the protagonist, Kim asked him to send a picture of her, and he had the idea of taking a selfie. As the divine lady had never taken a selfie before, she didn't really know what to do, besides having to put on makeup too. But with beauty like that, who needs makeup anyway? The divine lady ended up being a little too far away, and he asked her to come closer. After that, he shows her what the perfect angle and selfie would be for them to send to Kim. And finally, they take the picture that their friend had asked for, thus making Kim extremely envious of the protagonist because of the beautiful damsel who was next to him. On the way out of the company, he asked her not to make a request, as he would take her home normally. But as she would like to support him in his work, she insisted on requesting a ride. Let's just say that here he threw out one of those one-liners, saying that that a rich woman came to him, so he would have to take advantage of it in any case. But clearly, the rich one here is actually him. Inside the car, she asks what he should do to be able to create a charitable foundation. After that, she gives him some instructions that he should follow, and of course, the risks he could also run. But he didn't care much about that, and would still do the best he could. A short time later, they finally finished the journey to the Divine Lady's house, but he still extended an invitation to her, asking her to go with him to Yangsheng the next day, and she replies that if she had a little time to spare, she would be honored to accompany him. When she finally gave the last 5-star review that our protagonist was missing, the girl from before appears again, rewarding him for having reached 100% of his current career. Following this, she asks if he would like to open a new career, and upon clicking yes, she welcomes him. Basically, his new career experience would be as a physical education teacher. In addition, he won another 500 million, and also a complete attribute enhancement potion, and the knowledge of the sages. Lin ended up thinking that it would be too easy to be a physical education teacher, and she replies that if he drank that potion, he would have no problem with any subject that was required of him, or something like that. The potion was called the knowledge of the sages, and the young maid replies that it was basically the wisdom of all the world's leading scholars, all compiled into a single vial of knowledge. Frightened by the things he needed to know to be able to teach physical education at that college, he ended up deciding to take the potion that the maid had given him. The beautiful system girl started the protagonist's new career, and he began to receive knowledge of all subjects, as she had said before. In addition, she says that that potion literally increased all of the protagonist's attributes. Thus, now the guy was completely in shape, then giving a big hug to the beautiful system damsel as a thank you. During the night, he receives a call saying that his Pagani was ready and he would send someone to pick it up. After that, he also receives a message from the Divine Lady, saying that she couldn't accompany him the next day, but she had still booked his flight for the morning. The next day, at the airport, he discovered that he would be traveling in first class. While he was chilling, looking at his cell phone, a guy with 2 companions also appears in first class. The girls then, as soon as they notice the protagonist, begin to admire him. The spoiled guy, out of envy or jealousy, ends up saying that what was important was actually being a rich young man with money, instead of just a handsome guy. Lin, upon hearing what he said, asked him not to get involved if he wanted to show off to them. When the young man sits down, he decides to make a bet with Lin, where basically, whoever got the flight attendant's number first would win the bet. Speaking of her, she soon enters to attend to the passengers, and the spoiled little boy calls her, saying that he and his colleague would like to get her number. However, she could only choose one of them. Soon she remembers a warning she had received before, where basically some rich young men might want to hit on her, but she replies politely, saying that it was against the company's rules to add passengers' numbers. But apparently, he didn't really accept that answer, and says that a passenger's wish could not be refused so easily. When the flight attendant notices that Lin was wearing a limited edition watch that cost more than 10 million, she quickly decided to take his number, leaving the spoiled boy with his face on the floor. And to make matters worse, his companions ended up making fun of him too. Then, the young man who was keeping him company notices the presence of a beautiful lady who had just arrived. We then see that the beautiful lady was actually precisely the Divine Lady, and the protagonist decides to make a bet with the boy again, to see who would get that beautiful damsel's contact first. After that, politely, Miss G excuses herself to Lin, and the boy from before starts trying to strike up a conversation to get her number. However, Lin ended up taking an unexpected action, saying that the young man there didn't even have a chance with her. Without reacting, the boy simply didn't know how to act at that moment, and the protagonist says that he had a superpower, where basically he could make her fall in love with him in just 1 second. But from her little face, that already happened a long time ago. As the young man didn't know about their relationship, he said that she could go to the police if she wanted, since they had 2 witnesses there, which ended up making her even more embarrassed by Lin's attitude. But as the plane was too full, he just wanted to get some fresh air. Furthermore, she was clearly getting more and more embarrassed with that whole situation. With that, he finally made the young man admit defeat, and acknowledge that Lin was really amazing. Lin then asks why she was there, since she had said she would be busy, and clearly she had only told him a little lie, so she would accompany him on his visit to the orphanage that day. Meanwhile, the guy from before was seething with envy of our protagonist. As Lin didn't like what the spoiled boy had just called him, he decided to confront him. The young man then replies, saying that he didn't even know her, but still put his arms around her waist, reinforcing that he was indeed what he had just said. With that, Lin says that this was actually love love at first sight, that he would take to the wedding, and he could never understand something like that. After that, she ends up scolding him slightly, saying that he had taken advantage of her since she got on the plane, thus getting a slight pinch from the beautiful damsel, who no longer knew how to respond to his provocations. A few hours later, they finally arrive at the orphanage where Lin grew up, and even though the properties there were even cheaper, that building was certainly worth tens of millions. This made Lin's admiration for Wang Ma grow even more, as she still preferred to be there taking care of the young orphans instead of living a life as a rich madam. Soon some children notice the presence of our protagonist with his girlfriend, and she hands out some gifts she had brought especially for the little ones. With a sweet smile like that, it's kind of hard to resist. When Wang Ma says that he could have told her he was coming for a visit, so she would have made his favorite dishes, he replies that he wanted to surprise them, and what a surprise, since she had rushed him to find a girlfriend soon, and he ended up getting an airplane. The divine lady introduces herself, and her full name is Ji Qin Yang, but I prefer to continue calling her Divine Lady, Beautiful Damsel, and the original Miss Ji, as from now on they would be a family. Mrs. Ma told her that she didn't need to bring anything next time. When the old man goes out to divide the things for the children to eat, he ends up realizing that young Lin Yu had also come to visit them with her boyfriend, exactly on the same day as our protagonist. When Miss Ji asks who she was, he replies that that girl lived in the same orphanage as him too, but she managed to go to a university, while he had gone to Zhangjia. It doesn't take long for us to see Yu with her boyfriend, who honestly already looked spoiled. She had also brought some gifts for the orphans, and when the young man sees the boys admiring the car he had more closely, he showed a typical behavior of selfish people, who think that people with less money than them are nothing but insects. As soon as Yu notices Lin's presence, she asks him to introduce his girlfriend. Politely, the divine lady introduces herself, showing that she was happy to meet the girl. Apparently, Yu ended up finding the divine lady very beautiful and pleasant to be her sister-in-law. The simp here ended up being too enchanted with Miss Ji, and went to greet her needing a bib apparently. However, Lin quickly interrupts him, saying that they didn't need to be so formal at that moment, thus leaving the simp completely indignant at how he had managed to get such a beautiful girl like her. The young man says that he would donate 100,000 to the orphanage, and when Mrs. Ma was reluctant to accept the donation, Lin told her to accept it. After all, no matter how small a fly's leg is, it's still meat. Upon hearing this, the young man challenges Lin to make a donation as well, and he quickly accepts, saying that he would make a donation of 100 million. Thinking that the protagonist was joking with him, he asked him to stop telling such jokes so early. Mrs. Ma then asks them not to talk about it now, as they had just arrived, but the young man continues the subject, saying that if he donated 100 million, he would donate 10 times more than him. Lin, upon hearing this, decides to make a call, giving the account number for them to send 100 million to Mrs. Ma. As soon as she also receives the amount of money, she almost had a heart attack seeing so many zeros in her account. The guy from before then ended up not believing it and decided to personally check Lin's cell phone. Upon seeing that that was really true, Lin asks when he would make his donation of 1 billion to Mrs. Ma, as that was what he had said he would do. Even the divine lady realized that her boyfriend was hopeless and really liked to provoke people. After that, the boy didn't even know where to hide his face and soon leaves, saying that he had things to do, therefore he was going to leave. When Miss Yu tries to go after him, the protagonist says that she wouldn't be happy with him, so it was better to let him go. Mrs. Ma then asks where he had gotten so much money, and the divine lady replies that he had large projects that cost hundreds of millions of dollars. With that, she asked for his account number so that she could return the money she had just won. However, Lin replies that she should keep the money, as he was now capable of getting even more than that, and asks them to go eat. At lunch, the divine lady asks if he wouldn't like to accompany her to a branch of her company, as there were some problems happening and she needed to solve them. Just a warning, I found out that she was actually the president of the company Lin worked for, the one he was fired from on the first day of service. That is, she was the one who had more authority than everyone there. Thus, she was possibly the founder of the company. Lin replies that the chances of her finding anything there are low, but as she was too naive, she ended up thinking that not telling them that she was going to pay a visit would do any good. In the end, he ended up agreeing to go and says goodbye to his foster mother. Only when the divine lady realizes the clothes she was wearing did she decide to change before they went to the branch. While he waited patiently outside the door, the beautiful damsel appears asking for his help to close the zipper on the back of her blouse. However, the zipper ended up getting stuck on some kind of fabric or something, and he asked her to wait until he could get the scissors to cut it. Let's just say that one of her pieces of clothing ended up fraying in one place only, so he needed to cut it or the zipper wouldn't close. After finally managing to cut the thread, they managed to get to the divine lady's branch. At the reception, it was clear that the employees were not expecting her there, and she soon orders the vice president to take that year's accounts to the meeting room. While she was checking the accounts, we can get a slight glimpse of the great beauty that the character possessed. And now that you've looked enough, we can continue with the summary. summary. She then asks what happened to Wang Jingyi, who was someone of power there in that branch. Furthermore, the company's accounts closed in the red by more than 30 million, and she decided to call the police. Shortly after that, some bullies appeared in her office, saying that they were there to collect a debt of 1 million that Wang Jingyi owed them. Realizing that the divine lady was very beautiful, the suspicious guy says that if she spent some time with him, he would forgive this debt, leaving the divine lady completely speechless after this remark. But as a self-respecting Sigma that our protagonist is, he realizes that all of this was actually a setup by Jingyi himself. When their leader shows irritation upon hearing what Lin had just said, Lin asks if 2 million would be enough to make them take Jingyi to the police for him. They quickly decided to switch sides, saying that they could do that and some bonuses too. But the only thing Lin wanted was for them to go after the traitor who was embezzling money from the beautiful damsel's company. She, not knowing what to do now, asks for his help, and he tells her to separate the financial information and he would take her to the police. At the police station door, he says that this matter could not become public, because if it were published in the financial newspaper, the market value of her company would quickly fall, and she, after hearing what she had to do, thanks him, saying that she wouldn't know what to do if it weren't for him. Soon, Lin replies that she would go alone, as he was going after the guy who was embezzling money. But as this was dangerous for her, she insisted, saying that she couldn't let him go alone. However, the protagonist hands her the documents, asking her not to worry about him. And finally, he sets off in search of the guy, while the divine lady asked in her thoughts for him to be careful. 3 hours later, Lin appears with Junggi, and we see the divine lady all downcast with that whole situation. But as soon as she sees our protagonist, it seems that her world was filled with color again, and she runs out asking if he had been hurt. But he replies that he was fine, and that the rest was now up to the police and the judge. The thug then apologizes to Miss G, saying that he would even return the money, the house, the car, and everything he managed to buy with it. However, it was too late for him now, therefore, he would need to pay for his crimes. As they had nothing more to do there after solving this problem, she tells them to go say goodbye to his mother and to return to Zhongai soon. At the place where they would stay, she says that thanks to him, everything ended up working out. Thus, as a reward for his recent actions, she would cook especially for him, leaving Lin relatively surprised to discover that she knew how to cook, and she reveals that, in fact, she had great culinary skills. After that, she decided to show off her skills in the kitchen, and let's just say that it seems she must have other types of skills as well, if you know what I mean. While he was tasting the delicious food that the divine lady had prepared especially for him, she asked him to try even more. He then mentions that he had seen her talking on the phone recently and asks if she was resolving matters related to the previous case. But she, in fact, was already preparing the evidence to be able to hire a new person the next day. And since she was the president of the company, she had to be able to handle these things quickly. After Lin finished eating, he comments that he didn't expect her to be so good at this, therefore, he decided to give her a reward as well. She even tries to say that he didn't have to do anything, as it was he who had helped her company a lot recently. However, Lin quickly approaches her to be able to reward her, asking her to close her eyes, and soon she ends up receiving quite a reward from our protagonist, who obviously doesn't mess around and takes life very seriously. He notices that she had gone to the company early, and he ends up receiving a mysterious call suddenly. Upon answering, it was the HR manager of the university where he would be teaching, saying that he could officially start the next day, and he replies that he would be there on time. Early the next morning, we have a beautiful view of this university, where basically you could already see that in that place, what there was most was a beautiful, healthy youth. He then receives a call from his girlfriend, who was the divine lady, asking him to give her a ride, but he says that he couldn't anymore, as he had now stopped being a driver to be a professor at the university. And as that was his first day of work, he couldn't leave early. Initially, she didn't quite believe him, but clearly with the physique he had, and the instructions he also received when he drank that potion before, he was more than fit to be able to work there. It doesn't take long for the university students to start admiring our protagonist, saying that if they had such a handsome professor, they would never miss classes. In the office, Lin introduced himself as the new professor, and here we meet the university's director, named Suji. Clearly, she wasn't there to mess around, so she quickly told him that he would need to work hard there. She had a task for him to complete, and only then would he receive a class to teach. In this part, I'll try to summarize it well for you. From what I understood, Lin's task here was precisely to hire some hotels to get an internship worth 3,000, with accommodation included for the intern. But even realizing the director's real intentions, he replies politely, saying that he would try, although it was a very difficult task. Shortly after, one of the professors showed the place where Lin would work and give some tips so that he could complete that task a little more quickly. With that, Lin decided to contact the hotels that the professor had given him right away, but he had another plan up his sleeve, it seems. And as he was the owner of the Peninsula Hotel, he decided to call his general manager precisely, asking him to go quickly to the place where he was. A short time later, the protagonist explains to the manager what plan he had in mind, and after that, he decided to go to the place where the director was. She, thinking that he was breaking the rules for having brought an outsider there, was about to start scolding Lin. However, he said that as she had asked him to contact a place for an internship, he had done so, and there was the person responsible for the hotel he had contacted. His manager, not knowing the situation well, thought that that girl was actually his new woman, but in reality, he ended up misunderstanding. She, impressed with Lin's efficiency, couldn't believe that he had quickly found a place. With that, Lin introduces the general manager of the Peninsula Hotel, asking her to talk to him about the details. Then the manager introduces himself and says that he had accepted his offer to pay a salary of $3,500, in addition to the accommodation costs for the new intern, and that if she had any complaints regarding the salary, they could talk more about it. However, the director had no complaints at all, thus her colleagues would soon contact him again. Lin then received some proficiency points as a reward, thus already completing 20% of his career, and as a reward for that, he got the Zhonghai Longxin Institute, which was a highly renowned research institute. Lin, without realizing it, was staring blankly into space, and the professor asks if he was okay, but he replies that he was just lost in thought. In addition, the professor mentions that he was really amazing for having managed to solve such a difficult problem in such a short time. A short time later, Lin's general manager says goodbye, and he soon asks if he could now schedule his class for the next day. The director then, as she had no more excuses this time, said that he could, and finally our protagonist says goodbye to her. As Lin was leaving the director's office, she asked her secretary, or professor, who I also didn't quite understand what this guy actually is, to prepare only the physical education class for Lin. We then discover that the attendance rate in physical education classes was less than 30%. Thus, if the attendance rate was less than 95%, the professor's salary would be immediately cut in half. But apparently that was precisely what she wanted, as it made total sense for Lin to receive this responsibility. We continue with Lin going to visit the cruise port he had won, until suddenly a car almost ran over him, in addition to the driver saying that he was the one in the wrong, basically, and that he shouldn't touch her car. As soon as the woman gets out of the car, she starts bragging about her car being worth $1 million. Thus, he wouldn't be able to pay if the car were scratched. But the protagonist replies that that was just an A8, and what's more, not even when he drove a Pagani did he act like her. But apparently, the woman didn't even believe a word he had just said about it, showing herself to be a completely proud person. In the meeting room, she ends up being called out for her delay, and says she met a person in the parking lot who made her late. Initially, we notice a rivalry between this woman and another employee of the company for some time now, and soon our protagonist appears, leaving the shrew from before surprised to see that the owner of the place was precisely the guy she had just called a bastard. When Lin asks if she was an employee of that company, an employee there answers her position, and that she was also famous, but since she was so famous, both should leave, as they didn't need people like her there. The young woman from before then starts apologizing for having acted that way before, asking for another chance. But as people with her attitude weren't worth his time, they ended up being left out of this operation and losing a great opportunity. After that, the girl from before begins to explain her plan to be able to make that the largest cruise terminal in the world. Lin even liked her idea and asks what she could do if she received $200 million for the renovation. She soon replies that she would make that port one of the top 5 in the world. When he asks if she could keep the port as a leader in the sector for more than 10 years if he invested $800 million, she and the other employees were left speechless upon hearing an exorbitant amount of money being mentioned. But still, the young woman replies that she was confident that she could meet his expectations, and with that, he finally decides to leave, saying that he would pay $200 million in advance for the project. Then our protagonist received a call from the director of the Longxin Research Institute, who wanted to talk to him about Lin's acquisition of the institute. The next morning, he had arrived relatively happy for the new workday, but the director soon asks him to prepare for class. She then explains about the attendance rate, saying that if it were lower than 95%, the total bonus for the class would be reduced. But he was still happy nonetheless, especially since he wasn't there just for the money, he just wanted to be able to teach his class. However, since she had already arranged everything, he was practically forced to teach the class now. On the way to the classroom, he ends up meeting 2 female students who stopped him, asking if he was going to teach since he had a textbook in his hand. Lin replies that his next class would be precisely physical education, and he was heading to the classroom at that moment. The girls then ask where his classroom was, so they could support him, And right after telling them the location of the classroom, he decided to leave. The girls then sent a message to their friends, saying that the new professor would be teaching in a short while, thus alerting everyone who could to attend his class. For now, in the classroom where Lin was going to teach, there were few people present, and the director arrives shortly after, thinking that he wouldn't be able to break the mark of 50 people in his classroom. However, suddenly they notice a suspicious movement around and discover that many of the students had gone to witness our protagonist's class. She, not knowing what to do or what was happening, began to wonder what that was. And apparently, Lin's good looks attracted all the girls to his class, or at least a small portion of them. But it seems it wasn't just the girls who had gone to witness his class, as there were even male students too. And in a short time, the classroom was completely full. The professor then asks them to leave, as there was no longer a need to count how many students were in the room, but she insisted on staying and said she would like to see how he would teach this class. Like a normal class, he decided to start by taking attendance, so anyone who wasn't called could come to him to register for his class. Half an hour later, they had already passed number 120, and they still hadn't put all the names on the attendance list. The director then mentions that the registration could be set aside so they could start the class right away, but apparently the girls didn't like that very much, especially since he might end up forgetting them. Besides, he had his own teaching method, so she shouldn't interfere with the pace of Lin's class, thus receiving some looks with completely macabre intentions directed at her. And finally, the director ended up giving in and letting Lin teach the class his way. When the registration was complete, he was ready to start the class, but a girl mentions that he hadn't called her name, and so he decided to retake the attendance. But in the end, the bell rang, and he says goodbye to his students, saying that they would continue in the next class. Even the director was left speechless, as she had never seen anything like it in her life. He then asks his superior if his classes were up to par, and with a lot of anger, she ended up yielding and answering yes. And finally, Lin says goodbye as he still had a lot of things to do. A short time later, he ends up receiving a visit from a system girl from before, the same one as always, congratulating him for having successfully completed his first class. As a reward, he had won a master memory, and he asks what the difference was from the knowledge of the sages that he had recently received. Basically, the knowledge of the sages was very broad, but the master knowledge would give a specialized experience in a certain field, but he was the one who had to select the knowledge he would like to use. After that, he ends up asking who was the most powerful man in the field of chips, and when she answers who it was, he decides to acquire exactly that person's mastery for himself. With that, he was definitely prepared to be able to make a great breakthrough in the field of chips. At the Longxing Research Institute that Lin owned, we see two employees, Lu Ying and Li Shu, two important people at the institute, waiting for our protagonist. The girl then became outraged, thinking that her research might end soon, since the institute was acquired by just a rich young man. However, the vice president soon tries to calm her down, as she was being too hasty by acting and thinking that way. Another employee joins the conversation as well, and basically, he believed that Lin knew nothing about the research institute. And speaking of him, a short time later he arrives, and the vice president decided to show our protagonist the place. He then comments that their equipment was too outdated, but the old man replies that they had no way to replace them at the moment, as they didn't have enough money. Then the old man gives some information about their current situation, and Lin would take a look and get back to them later. The guy from before then tries to talk to Lin, saying that he had some things he would like to say as a team member. Basically, he was asking the protagonist not to meddle too much in their work, thus letting them act as they wished. After that, he asks what the graduation of the guy who had just referred to him was, and he replies that he had a PhD in information and communication technology. Lin then replies that he thought his diploma was from kindergarten, given the way he had recently acted. The guy then kind of brags about the university he graduated from, thinking he was a rare person, therefore asking him not to insult him if possible. But Lin only looked down on ignorant people like him. Furthermore, he had absolute control over the institute, so if he didn't want to follow his orders, he just had to pack his things and leave. The vice president then tries to defend the guy from before, and he again replies that if he left now, it would be an incalculable loss for Lin. This was because of the research he was doing that could allow them to advance at least 10 years in the national chip industry. As the guy thought too highly of himself, Lin ended up taking the opportunity to teach him a lesson, and that the earth would never stop spinning just because of him. But the young man still insisted that without him, that project would never be completed. He then asks the vice director what project this was, and when the old man finishes explaining what it was exactly, the protagonist asks if it was difficult, and he replies yes. With that, Lin decided to do it in place of the guy from before. Then Then the vice president asks what Lin's graduation was. Upon saying that he had a degree in marketing, the old man was surprised by him. With Lin's initiative to solve that problem, even the guy from before decided to let him work in peace. And a short time later, he had already found several bugs and other errors as well. After finishing writing all the codes again, they could now continue doing the rest of the tests. When the guy asks if he didn't need to check again, Lin replies that it wouldn't be necessary. The vice director, upon taking a closer look, realizes that that was a perfect structure for them to work with. And since he had solved a problem that the young man from before had taken a long time to do, he could now leave, as they no longer needed him there. Following this, Lin asks the old man to make a list of the outdated equipment and send it to him, so they would be replaced by more modern ones. Furthermore, he would call him later to send the 50 million, so they could purchase the new equipment, and he would also add a salary bonus for them. With that, the old man from before had nothing more to say, and just thanks him for such generosity. The girl then apologizes for having acted that way before, and would like to ask him a professional question. However, as he didn't have much time available, he ends up giving his personal contact so that she could contact him again if she had any questions. On the way out, the vice director decided to accompany him, and suddenly Lin notices the presence of two people there, one of them being the president of the university where the protagonist taught. He was there possibly to borrow the laboratory, but since the institute had now been bought, he would have to speak directly with the owner of the place, and the vice decides to introduce who the new owner of the laboratory was. The president, after greeting him, says that they would pay for the use of the laboratory, but the protagonist says that wouldn't be necessary, and what's more, they would donate the old equipment to the university, as it was no longer useful to them. The president's secretary asks if they didn't know each other, and Lin replies that they had met in the HR department a few days ago. Soon, the president asks what he was doing teaching at a university, if he had the purchasing power to buy the research institute. And as always, he just replies that it was to experience life. As Lin had made an invaluable donation to the university's research by donating the equipment, the vice president was going to promote him to vice director. However, our protagonist wouldn't like to be too important there, so he would give this position to Lin, but would keep it all private and few people would know about it. The next day, Lin was preparing for another day of work, until suddenly a spoiled little boy arrives to disturb his peace. When Lin heard the young man was behind him and asks who he was, we soon discover that this little boy was actually some kind of admirer of Director Sue, and was there thinking that Lin was causing trouble for her. But in reality, I think he was just jealous of her, and even Lin must have thought so too. The young man said that he was just a nuisance, so it would be better if he left. However, as Lin didn't take orders from anyone, he openly decided to go against the young man's will. The professor tries to warn Lin not to say anything, as the spoiled young man was the nephew of the school's vice president. It doesn't take long, and Miss Sue also arrived, asking why the spoiled boy was there, since she had asked him not to visit her office anymore. Furthermore, regarding the professional relationship between Lin and her, the young man had no business interfering, thus leaving the little boy from before with his face on the floor after seeing their proximity. After doing that, she explains, saying that she only did it because she didn't want the boy to keep pestering her. But our protagonist didn't mind serving a beautiful woman, and with that remark, he managed to make her look at him with different eyes from now on. A short time later, after the young man leaves, she receives a call from the university's vice president, and she says that he wanted to speak precisely with Lin. And finally, she asks him to be nice so as not to worsen his situation any further. In the vice president's office, we see the spoiled boy from before, who was saying that Lin was being fired at that very moment. But before that, he would like to know the real reason for being fired. The vice president then mentions that he believed Lin's skills were not sufficient to qualify him to teach at that university. After that, he decided to reply to a message on his cell phone, where the university president said that he had prepared everything for him to become the honorary vice director. However, as he was being fired now, there was nothing more he could do about it. Upon hearing this, the president quickly goes to the room where Lin was, to find out what was happening. The vice even tries to explain that Lin's skills were not suitable for him to work there, but of course the president didn't believe it, especially because he had gone through so much trouble to bring him to the university as vice director, and still, the vice president was able to put him through such embarrassment, even though he had had so much difficulty before bringing Lin there. The president then says that Lin was the director of the Longshin Research Institute, and the only ones who are not worthy of a position there were precisely him and his nephew. Therefore, they should resign voluntarily. The former vice even asks for a second chance, but the president replies that he had already given him too many chances, and his nephew always got him into trouble. With that, the young man ended up getting a good slap in his face because of his selfish attitudes. After all this embarrassment, the president apologizes to our protagonist. Furthermore, he was promoting Lin as the new vice president of the university, but he ended up politely refusing, as he would just like to be a common professor and stay in peace. As the president knew he was very discreet, they would say that he was just a vice director, but he would still be the vice president, therefore they would not make his position public. And in the end, Lin ended up accepting. In the director's office, he and the professor from before were upset, thinking that Lin would be fired, but soon the president appears with him there. He wasn't there just to talk, and broke the news that the vice president had been fired by him, along with his nephew. And finally, he introduces Lin as the vice director, and asks if it was okay with her that they shared the same office. And finally, the president says goodbye to his employees. The professor then asks what happened, since not only had he not been expelled, but he had also managed to get promoted. And Lin just replies that, in fact, the president had seen some potential in him. Again, the girl from before appears, rewarding him for reaching 60% of his career. And as a reward, he ended up getting the Twin Towers. A while later, he received a call exactly from the location of the Twin Towers, thus setting up a meeting with him, so that he could check the property he had just acquired. As he now had many properties, he needed to create a company to consolidate them all. The only thing he didn't realize when entering the room was that the director was precisely getting ready in the office. And soon, an employee pushes our protagonist out, so that she could finish, but completely embarrassed as well. At a celebratory event, or something like that, our protagonist was completely in character, and there he ends up meeting the Divine Lady, who possibly asked for just a minute. As he was not made of iron, he decided to go get something to eat, as he was very hungry. Suddenly, a girl arrives wanting to add him on the neighboring social network, but as Lin ended up refusing, the girl decided to leave, completely outraged with him. The protagonist then overhears the Divine Lady talking with some women at the place, where a design company had won $800 million for a large project that would happen. More specifically, the renovation of the ship terminal, and he realizes that in fact, the company the girls were talking about was precisely the company he had hired to do the renovation at the port. A young man then appears, striking up a conversation with Miss G. After all, she was also interested in that large project which would happen soon. The young man offers her a deal, saying that if she wanted to take on that project, he could think of something. And our protagonist just watched the conversation in the background. Since the young man had such an important position, she suggested that he go to her company so they could talk. But he ended up saying that they could simply go to a dinner so they could talk better about the matter. This only made our protagonist finally take the reins of the situation, saying that the Divine Lady didn't have time to meet with someone like him. And then she finally replies, saying that she had recently scheduled a date with Lin, therefore she would have to decline his invitation. The young man then said that she was too arrogant, as she was missing an opportunity that was worth hundreds of millions. But as Lin was the one who had total power over the project, he said that the design project would not be given to him, as he knew another more promising company than his. In the end, Lin ended up convincing the young man to call his cousin, who was the head of the design company. Furthermore, he put the cell phone on speakerphone so that everyone could hear. And when our protagonist introduces himself to speak with his cousin, the guy on the phone finally recognized his voice. The young man from before asks if his cousin knew Lin from somewhere, and he replies that he was actually the owner of the ship terminal, and the project had been given to him precisely by Lin. Upon seeing that it was Lin who was actually in charge of everything, the young man starts to apologize, like all the others, for his rude attitude recently. And let's just say that this time, our protagonist ended up accepting and letting it slide. Next, he tells the Divine Lady that he would wait for her in the lobby, as he was very tired. And as he was going there, we see that the women there were completely enchanted with him. When Miss G finally arrives at the location he mentioned, he was pretending to be sleeping on the sofa, and soon we see the beautiful damsel approaching him calmly, so as not to wake him. However, he soon pulls her closer to him, and he was just pretending this whole time. The Divine Lady was surprised by Lin's attitude in buying the Wanjiang terminal, especially because even while doing his common job, he was always investing in other businesses as well. At the end of this conversation, she says that she couldn't disagree with him and would do her best to finish the terminal project with quality and quantity. However, he soon mentions that he never said he would give her the terminal project. Still, if he didn't do it, he would sleep on the sofa, thus receiving a slight pinch from the Divine Lady. And in the end, this all ended in the best possible way, as we are seeing now. The next day, he had gone to visit the Twin Towers precisely, and suddenly a girl appears calling for him. This girl's name was Mo Chin Wan, a college classmate of Lin's. As the year had passed, she asks what he had been doing to make a living, and he replies that he was now a university professor. The girl then soon starts to kind of snub his job, as she was earning much more than him, even though he was the nerd of the class class in the past. Next, she asks what he was doing more specifically there at the Twin Towers, and he replies by asking if she would believe him if he said he was there to get the apartment. At one point, he asks if there was something wrong with her company, since there were so many people at the entrance, and she replies that the mysterious tycoon who bought the Twin Towers would be visiting them that day to do the paperwork. Thus, her vice president and the other executives were there to greet him. Her boyfriend appears next, asking her to follow him soon. She then introduces her boyfriend to Lin, asking them to set a day to have dinner among the three of them, and so her boyfriend could try to get a job for him. However, the arrogant guy refuses immediately. As if that wasn't enough, he also says that the person she wanted him to have dinner with was not important. Therefore, it would be a complete waste of time to eat with him. And soon, she says goodbye to Lin with her arrogant boyfriend who didn't even know who he was really talking to. Even our protagonist was surprised by the young man's lack of consideration earlier. While the people from that company were waiting precisely for our protagonist, he mentions that he had only bought 2 of their buildings, but the reception was still too large. When the guy from before realizes that Lin was right at the beginning of their reception, the couple was impressed by his attitude, and also outraged, as they didn't know who Lin really was. The girl then tries to talk to Lin to get him to leave, saying that that place was not for him. The president then asks what she was doing, and she replies that he was her former classmate, and therefore was not quite right in the head. In addition, her boyfriend arrives calling security to get rid of our protagonist, but ends up receiving a good slap in his face, as that was actually precisely who had bought the Twin Towers. Therefore, the 2 of them were to pack their things and leave that company immediately. The girl, not believing any of it, asks Lin if he had really bought the Twin Towers, and he replies that he had tried to tell her before, but she was the one who hadn't believed it. After that, now her boyfriend would like to have a date at night with Lin over dinner. However, it was too late now. After all, a few minutes before, he said that Lin was not qualified to have dinner with him, and let's just say that now the roles were simply reversed. The president then asks him to ignore those people, and asks them to go to the meeting room. Once inside, he would have to sign a mountain of papers, which had already made him tired just by looking at so many things he had to sign. Half an hour later, our protagonist had finally finished the signatures, and with that, the president congratulates him on his acquisition. In addition, he also asks if Lin had any suitable candidate for the property, as the Twin Towers were now under his responsibility. The protagonist asks if the manager had anyone in mind. After telling Lin a possible candidate for him to hire, Lin asks him to get in touch with him, and they would finally finalize the formalities. At that moment, on the way out of the company, we see the couple of losers who had just been fired. After an excellent job of irritating the owner of the place, the girl from before then takes the opportunity to break up with the guy she so proudly called her boyfriend a short time ago. As she had said she wanted to marry him, he didn't expect this, and she replies that Lin had written her a love letter in the past, and now she was going to be with him. Only then did he realize the type of person she really was. In the end, it's all just about money here apparently, except for the divine lady who acts differently from this rattlesnake. A short time later, our protagonist finally appears, and the anaconda appears throwing herself all over him, saying that she had just broken up with her boyfriend. He asks what that had to do with him. The girl replies that since he had written her a love letter in the past, she was now giving him a chance, therefore he had better take advantage of it. But apparently, the girl hit her head, as the one who had actually written that letter was a completely different person, and it hadn't been him. With that, the anaconda ended up going through a great embarrassment, as several people there began to speak ill of her because of her despicable attitude. As our protagonist had nothing more to do there, he soon says goodbye to the girl, as he still had a lot to do. The rattlesnake ended up getting into his car without any permission, asking him to take her home, as she had just been fired. However, this ended up making him completely outraged, as he hadn't even given her permission to get into his car. We continue with the girl from before, insisting on remaining in our protagonist's car, solely because they had been classmates in the past. As she refused to get out of his car, he decided to call the police on her, and only then did she agree to leave the vehicle. After that, we see a scene of possibly a fight, where basically, a suspicious man was demanding that Miss Yin give him compensation. As there was no need for him to make that whole scene, just because of what happened, she said she would pay for the repair. As the suspicious old man thought that she wouldn't have that much money to be able to pay for his car's repair, he thought of a second option, so that this debt could possibly be paid. Basically, she would need to be his secretary, and with that, he could deduct from her salary little by little to be able to pay for his car's repair. However, upon hearing this, the young lady ended up changing the tone of her voice, saying that the old bastard was dreaming too high. The scum from before takes a cloth from his pocket with some kind of substance, thus placing it directly in Miss Yin's nostrils. With that, she ended up getting dizzy upon inhaling what was on the fabric, but to his sadness and her joy, our protagonist protagonist arrives suddenly. When the beautiful young lady realizes that the protagonist had appeared, she decided to run into his arms. He asked what happened to her wrist, as it was red, and she replies that it was precisely the bastard from before who wanted to knock her out at all costs. When Lin asks for more details about what really happened, she mentions what the perverse guy from before had said. According to him, the wind knocked her motorcycle over onto his car, and he began to demand that she pay for the repair. As Lin was also gifted with detective skills, he began to think that it wasn't that windy that day, so there was no way her motorcycle could have been knocked over so easily. Since there was a security camera filming everything that happened, Lin said that they would look to see in detail if everything the suspect said was really true. This made the perverse scum quickly change his mind, saying that he himself would find a place to repair his car. Realizing that the man from before was in too much of a hurry, our protagonist says that if there was anything suspicious happening there, he would call the police on him. The guy knelt quickly when he heard what Lin had said, saying that he had a family and small children. Therefore, he pleaded for him not to call the police. However, when it was time to try to knock out the beautiful young lady to take her somewhere, he didn't think so much about his family apparently. As Lin was being too nice that day, he ended up letting it slide, saying that next time he would definitely send him to jail. With all this confusion, Miss Yin ended up mentioning that she was dizzy, and he said that he would take her home soon. Inside the car, he asked why she didn't buy a car for herself, since she was now a sales manager. She replies that for now it was not a good idea to do so, as she had just received a promotion. He then tells her not to care about what people said, and that any day now he would take her to a car dealership to choose one for her. Here, Miss Yin ended up having some hallucinations, probably because of the substance she had inhaled a short time ago from the fabric. But it doesn't take long for her to offer herself as payment to our protagonist for having helped her recently. Although the proposal was not so bad, Lin just asked her not to be impulsive, as they would soon arrive at her house. Arriving at the beautiful young lady's house, you could already see that she didn't have much time apparently to tidy up the house, or it was just laziness. Despite the whole mess, she quickly starts to tidy up, apologizing for him witnessing that. Lin ends up mentioning that he was very hot, so while she took a shower, he could sit and wait, and as soon as she finished, they could eat something. And so he did, and decided to wait by playing a famous game that many know, if not almost everyone. However, it doesn't take long for her to appear, asking him to see what was wrong with her, as her body was hot and she was still dizzy. Normally where I live, we call this a fever, but apparently her problem was completely different. While she rested a bit in bed, he asked if she lived alone now, and she reveals that she had recently divorced. So yes, she lived alone. As the beautiful damsel had become too needy, she asked Lin to accompany her for a moment, and after a while, he ended up giving in and decided to keep her company. Even having a deity supporting him, he still let himself get carried away by the moment. I think after being betrayed, his trust in people was completely destroyed. After all this, he wanted to know the reason why she got divorced, and she says that from the moment her husband cheated on her, their relationship had already ended. Lin ends up mentioning that he couldn't imagine a man would have the courage to betray such a beautiful woman. I just think he forgot about what he just did with the divine lady. As he was no longer useful there, he ended up deciding to leave, but she asks him to stay that night as it was very late and it could be tiring to drive, and he would leave the next morning. However, as he had to teach the next day, and her house was very far from the college, it was better for him to leave. Speaking of the next day, early in the morning, he notices that something had happened to his desk. The director's secretary then mentions that, as he was now the vice director, he would need to stay in the same office as Director Su. However, according to him, he didn't want to share a room with a tigress, and he asked for the secretary's help to take the desk back. Speaking of the tigress, it doesn't take long for her to appear next. Not knowing where to hide his face, Lin even tried to disguise it, saying that she had heard wrong. Later that same day, she ended up receiving a call, saying that one of her students was going to jump from the building, causing her to quickly start to despair. As she was preparing to leave, she tells Lin and the secretary what they had just said, and apparently the student wanted to jump because of something that happened at work. As she didn't think it was a good idea to go to the place alone, she decided to call our protagonist as well. Inside the car, Lin asks who the girl was who wanted to jump, and she mentions that the girl's name was Sun Xiao Yu, an exceptional student who would graduate that year. After her internship, she had rented an apartment, so the director didn't know much about what had happened. The secretary asked what was the place where she worked, as that was what the director had said before. She said that the girl worked in the capital Zhonghan, and as that name ended up sounding familiar to Lin, he remembered that that was actually Kim Han's company. It doesn't take long for them to arrive at the place where everything was happening, and they quickly realized that there really was a person on top of the building who intended to jump. And soon we see a beautiful pink-haired girl about to jump at any moment. The director, upon seeing that, decided to go in. And although the police officer said that they couldn't, she said that they were the girl's teachers. Therefore, they could help by trying to talk to her. And the police officer ended up allowing them to enter the place. As soon as they arrive, a girl who looked more like a teacher asked them to talk to the young lady. The director ends up asking the girl why she wanted to end her life, since she had recently said that she had found a good job, then asking her to calm down and really tell them what had happened, as they were there to help her. With that, the young girl ends up saying that she had been molested, and her boyfriend didn't believe her, so she didn't want to live anymore. This news ended up leaving all the teachers there completely speechless, but Lynn soon asks her to calm down and tell them who had done this to her. With tears in her eyes and a lot of pain in her heart, the girl replies that it had been the vice president of the company where she worked, and she would never have thought that he would be capable of doing something like that. The director even tries to calm her down, but didn't realize that she had gotten closer than she should have. Realizing that the director had approached, the girl tells her to keep her distance, as if they got any closer, she would definitely jump. As Lynn was already tired of that drama, he told her to jump then, especially since she shouldn't waste everyone's time there, as everyone had things to do. Besides, if she passed away anyway, she would go in vain, as the problem would not be solved, and the guy who made her go through that would remain free without any punishment. The director even tries to say also that they would certainly help her, but for the beautiful young woman, she didn't believe that would happen, especially since he was the vice president of a completely giant company, and they couldn't fight against them. Lynn promised that he would send him to jail, however, if she still wanted to die, he could never stop her. Thus, it was better for her to decide soon, as he didn't want to lose his precious time. When Xiaoyu was about to answer what he said, she ended up accidentally losing her balance and was about to fall for real. And if it weren't for our protagonist who held her in his arms, pulling her back and placing her to safety, the girl would have probably turned into paste. The local police officer ended up praising Lynn for what he did, but he says that it was nothing. Furthermore, they still needed to collect a statement from her about what happened, so that justice could be served. Meanwhile, the girl from before was asking if they would really be able to get any justice, since the Zhonghan capital was very powerful. However, she didn't even have time to answer, as she realized that Lynn was heading exactly for the capital. Miss Su ends up asking what he thought he would achieve there, and if he thought he would be more effective than the police themselves. His answer was that Xiaoyu was a student at his university, therefore he would have to help bring justice, and he decided to go look for evidence. Determined to stop Lynn, she asked the secretary to take care of the girls, and soon she appears in the car he was in, asking him to calm down. She also wanted to help the girl get justice, but according to her, they didn't know who the person was, asking him not to be impulsive. Rudely, he replies that it was none of her business, so it was better for her to get out of the car. But as a good and beautiful stubborn woman that she is, she said she wouldn't leave and would go wherever he went, and finally they go in search of justice. Arriving at the company, he says he is looking for Kui Bin Long. The receptionist, realizing that he didn't have an appointment, did not give the location of the guy he was looking for. After that, Lynn decided to make a call to Kim, asking in which office the person he was looking for was. After passing on the person's location information, Kim says that if there was any problem, he just had to say, and he would solve it for him. But according to the protagonist, it was nothing much. He was just going to give the perverse guy a pair of silver handcuffs. While the scum of society was talking to another person in his office, our protagonist arrives invading his room in the best possible way, asking the scum if he hadn't had enough fun. When a being that doesn't even deserve to be called an animal mentions that he could put them in jail, the protagonist retorts by saying that the one who should be arrested was him, precisely because of the recent fact that he had molested a student from Lin's university. At that moment, the scum realized that they were actually Xiaoyu's teachers. According to the scum, he was just about to look for them. This asshole's version was that the one who took the initiative was precisely Xiaoyu, and since he didn't want anything, she decided to frame him. But of course, that is a complete lie, and the teacher went after him without thinking. However, she was rudely pushed away by the scum of society, who said that he had forwarded the incident to his legal department. When our protagonist saw that scene, he prepared to give the insect a good beating, who even threatened Lin that if he did anything to him, the protagonist would be arrested. But he completely ignored the insolent one's warning and gives his opponent a good kick, sending him flying as usual. The insect from before ordered an employee to call the security guards to arrest our protagonist. And while the insect's helper was following the command he received, he swore he would erase our protagonist from history, or at least that's what he thought he could do, especially since he started to be humiliated again in front of everyone there. Even the director started to be impressed by his strength, despite his appearance being that of just a malnourished chicken. Then the security guards arrive, along with the head of the legal department, saying that they were going to sue him for intentional injury. However, Lin replies that he was nothing but a coward, and if he didn't shut up, he himself would go to him and make him stay silent. The scumbag mentions that that industry belonged to young Kim, and not even the protagonist could imagine the way he would end up 6 feet under. However, as Lin knew that Kim would be on his side upon discovering the whole truth, he continued to teach the scum of society a lesson. The scum, who had already lost some teeth to our protagonist, said that he was finished because Kim was coming to them at that very moment. As Kim's father was the uncle of this insect's cousin, he thought that he would never be on our protagonist's side. However, Lin replies that even if it were Kim's own father who was there, he would still beat that scum for what he did to his student. Speaking of young Kim Chow, he appears next to find out what was happening in his company. The crybaby then tells the young man that the protagonist had gone there only to cause trouble, in addition to having hit him. Therefore, they couldn't just let him get away with it. But you could already see that clearly Kim would never be on his side, especially since because of this scum, he ended up being embarrassed. Following this, he asks Lin what had happened, and that he would definitely help him solve that problem. The protagonist then replies what that scum had done to one of his students, and the fact that she was now trying to jump off the building to end her life. Kim was outraged upon realizing what he had done, and in addition, he still had the courage to say that it was Lin's student who had seduced him. As not even a young businessman could do such a thing, he decided to help our protagonist give the scum of society a good beating. The insect even tries to defend himself, saying that he was his cousin, therefore he couldn't do this to him, but it was completely the opposite of what he really thought. Kim then asked Lin to leave it with him, and that he would soon give him a satisfactory solution. The protagonist ended up accepting what the young man said, but he would still send the scum of society to prison, whether he wanted it or not. Following this, he also takes the teacher, telling them to leave, as Kim would take care of the rest. With that, the director was surprised by the connections he had, and that he had resolved it relatively quickly. On the way out of the company, she said that he was very powerful, and she was not surprised by the way he decided to go there after seeing the power he possessed. He just replies that if his students are bullied, they need to do something. Otherwise, they could never call themselves teachers. With this incident, it exposed a big problem in the school, where their education is very outdated. As a result of all this, the students couldn't adapt to the rhythm of survival in society when they leave the cocoon of the school. As she had agreed with what he said, she said that she would soon talk to the school president about it, especially since it was really time for some disciplinary education. The cosplay girl from before appears again, congratulating him for having saved a student and for still having proposed a reform plan. As he had completed 80% of his career, he ended up winning 1 billion as a reward, and since the task had been completed, he couldn't forget to go check his prize later. However, Lin ended up not hearing the director call him, and she soon asks what was wrong with him, as he had been standing there for a while. As he was apparently very tired, he could go home to rest a bit, and she also asks if he could go with her to meet Xiao Yu's boyfriend the next day. As he was also a professor, he said that she could count on him. After all, he would do whatever he could to help. At his home in the Kyushu Pavilion, he received a call from the general manager of the Twin Towers, who would like to have a meeting with him as soon as possible. As he was very tired at that moment, he asked them to meet the next day, at the Peninsula Hotel's coffee shop. At Kim's house, he ended up being called by his father, and soon we see the big shot asking if what happened recently was true, where basically he sent his cousin to jail. Young Kim replies that since he had done something wrong, and on top of that, offended his friend, it was fair that he learn a lesson. Interested in what kind of person this friend of his was, Kim's father asks if this person really deserved that kind of treatment from him. He replies to his father that Lin was a good friend, and upon hearing his name, the father asks if he was from a famous known family. However, Kim replies that that group he mentioned didn't even come close to his friend, not to mention that he was the owner of the Zongai circuit, and on top of that, he was the owner of the entire Kyushu villa as well. Upon hearing that he was really such a rich person, he decided not to talk about the scum of society anymore. However, he still mentioned that Kim should stop playing around and grow up. Thinking that his father was talking about work, he said that he was doing very well, and that the value of his company's shares had risen to over 10 billion as well. But the old man was actually talking about a girlfriend, and had found someone who would be very good for him. As the young man didn't want to get into a serious relationship for now, he even tried to refuse his father's request, but when he sees the picture of the divine lady, he was enchanted by her. However, he ended up realizing that she looked a lot like someone he had seen recently. After that, he shows another picture of the divine lady, along with the protagonist, to his father, asking if they were the same person. And only then did the old man realize that someone had already arrived first. Therefore, Kim could go ahead and continue having fun. And finally, he says goodbye to his father, as he still had a lot of things to do. The next day, Lin had gone to some kind of business office, and you could already tell that the women in the place were enchanted with him. At the reception, he was well received by a girl named Feng Shi. Following this, he hands over some documents for his company's registration, and she passes him 2 forms to fill out. When the girl mentions that he could add her on the neighboring social platform so that she could contact him later, he says that he would go to her if he needed anything, leaving the girl relatively more enchanted with him. Apparently, a supervisor at the place, upon seeing the way the receptionist was melting for our protagonist, didn't like that very much. Then Lin appears, saying that he would like to register his company along with the form he had recently filled out. However, the envious guy from before quickly starts to find one problem after another, preventing our protagonist from registering the company as he would like. With that, the receptionist from before became outraged with the old bald man. After a lot of stalling, even the beautiful receptionist started to scold the guy from before. And soon, Lin hands him the bank receipt with the amount he had stated on the form for the company's registration, a value of 500 million. At that moment, the girls in the company began to wonder why someone so rich still did things by himself, showing that he apparently didn't have a secretary yet. As he was handsome and rich, the receptionist from before fell completely in love. Once again, the envious guy from before finds another excuse to return the form, as the address he had put was precisely the Twin Towers. Thus, the place should state the specific floor where his company was, but he soon replies that his company was actually the Twin Towers, and even showed a contract, proving that he had paid 18 billion for them the other day. And I have to confess something, I find this protagonist very humble. What he never lacks is humility. Lin then asks if there were any more errors in the form, completely out of patience to deal with that pipsqueak. But this time, he finally shut up and simply did his job. After that, he felt that he was one step closer to his main goal. While he was in his car, he received a call from Director Su, who said that she had found Xiao Yu's boyfriend and had arranged to meet him at a place near the school. Lin replies that he would be there in exactly 20 minutes. After the 20 minutes passed, he finally arrived at the location where the director was, and it doesn't take long for him to find her on the upper floor. As the young man hadn't arrived yet, she tells the protagonist that they would graduate in a month, so it was normal for them not to take things so seriously anymore. In addition, the boy's family had a good position. Speaking of the insect scum, he soon arrives, and it won't take long for you to understand why I have so much anger for this brat. The insect's arrogance was such that he asked his teachers to get straight to the point, as he had other more important things to do. Leaving his ignorance aside, she says that she was just there to talk about young Xiao Yu, who had recently tried to end her life. However, he didn't even want to know about it, as she had nothing to do with him anymore. She then says that they weren't trying to interfere in his love life, but they would like him to at least comfort Xiao Yu, so that she wouldn't be so hurt inside. The being who ended up becoming worse than insect scum said that he only thought of her as an easy girl, and he never really intended to be with her. Upon hearing this, Director Su got upset and was about to give the fly a good slap in the face, which I honestly think would be an excellent idea. But the protagonist stopped her, and the scum from before decided to leave, refusing to comfort young Xiao Yu. She then tells Lin that he shouldn't have stopped her, as she would have liked to beat him up, but if someone did that and recorded a video, she would never be able to clear her name again. In addition, he mentions that he would need to take the afternoon off as well, but calmly this time. She wondered how a person like that could exist. In the fly's car from before, his father was scolding him for being late to the meeting with the big shot that afternoon, and he asks if this guy was really that rich. The scum's father replies that he wouldn't take his son there if one day he wasn't going to take over the family business for him. Therefore, he should pay attention so as not to ruin his business. According to the scum, he would be careful not to ruin such a big business, and then he calls our protagonist saying that he had arrived. Then Lin arrives as well to welcome his guests. The insect from before couldn't believe that it was Lin again, thinking that he was there only to insist that he talk to Xiao Yu. His father, upon noticing the way he was acting, asks what he was doing, and he replies that that man was a director and professor at his school, and after being reprimanded by him that morning, he was there again to torment him. The protagonist then tells the boy's father that he had given birth to a good son. After that, the scum's father began to give the scum some good slaps in the face, saying that he would hit him so much that he would turn him upside down. Not knowing why he was being beaten, he said that Lin was just a mere professor. But the situation changes when his father reveals that he was the one who had bought the Twin Towers. And since he dared to speak to him that way, the scum's father would continue to beat him until he saw the sun rise red. Our protagonist then says that he was a professor just to enjoy life. And again, the boy's father continued to correct his son. But it doesn't take long for the general manager of the Peninsula Hotel to appear, asking what was happening. In addition, he also asked if he would like him to get rid of them, but Lin asked him to leave it with him. Upon seeing the way the hotel's general manager treated our protagonist, both began to think that he owned the hotel as well. He only confirms their suspicion a short time later, saying that he also owned the hotel. In addition, he asks if for some reason they still had any more questions they would like to ask. The story continues with our protagonist talking to the spoiled boy's father from before, and he was asking Lin not to be too severe with him, despite the mistakes he had recently made. However, Lin says that the young man didn't do anything major, but he still did something he shouldn't have. Upon hearing this, the brat's father gives him a look that already made the young man freeze up, and he begins to apologize to our protagonist, saying that he would even get back together with the girl who almost erased herself from the story and would even marry if necessary, but would like a new opportunity. However, the only thing the protagonist asks is for them to forget what happened and for him to leave the girl alone, not bothering her in the future. Again, the boy's father apologizes, asking for a new chance, as in terms of work they could add a lot of value to the protagonist's company. In addition, from what I understood, the boy ended up hitting himself, saying that he was really wrong for having acted in that rude way before. Lin then says that young Feng could go outside, while he would like to speak only with his father. While the young man was waiting outside, the protagonist was telling his father that it was better for him to take good care of his son, as if he continued to act like this, his company could be in trouble in the future. At the end of the meeting, they just said goodbye formally, and the businessman just thanked the protagonist for the opportunity. After that, we see a scene where Director Su's secretary was saying that the matter concerning young Feng was hopeless. Clearly, the beautiful director was completely stressed with the way the young man had acted before, not to mention that he only had a little money according to her, but he still acted as if he were a rude millionaire. As not even the protagonist had been able to resolve this situation, he thought it best to let it go. However, she says that according to Lin's character, he was too calm and not as impulsive as they were. At least she acknowledges that she almost deformed the young man's face, if the protagonist hadn't held her back. Her secretary then ends up commenting that he and she made a perfect match, and from the director's reaction, she didn't think it was a bad idea. However, she then received a call, saying that young Feng wanted to talk to her, and the director just asked him to wait for her in her office, as she would be there soon. In her office, she asked what the spoiled young man wanted from her, to have gone there. Shortly after that, he begins to apologize to her for the way he acted before, and asked her not to take what happened personally either. According to the young man, thanks to the lesson the protagonist gave him, he realized his mistake, and would like to see young Xiaoyu that afternoon, asking if she couldn't take him to her to redeem himself as well. But according to the director, she said that it was okay. However, in her thoughts, she told herself that Lin was really powerful, as he had even taken care of young Feng. A while later, more specifically at Miss Ying's house, the protagonist went to visit her, and of course, she openly allowed him to enter her residence. He soon replies that he was there to take her to buy a car, the one he had promised her in the previous episode if I'm not mistaken. As he hadn't had breakfast yet, she asked him to sit down and at least have the first meal of the day with her, and he ends up accepting the lady's generous offer. As soon as he sits down, he comments that there was no need for such a luxurious meal as that, especially so early in the morning. But she just says that men are different from women, and they needed to eat more. I don't know where she got that from, as I've seen some women eat for 2 construction workers and still not be satisfied. After that, Miss Ying began to pamper our protagonist by feeding him, and he said that married women really knew how to take care of people. He then also asks if she had any requirements when buying a car, but apparently not. She just wanted a beautiful white car. He suggested that they buy a Maserati, but according to her, that didn't fit into the 200,000 budget she had. In addition, she also said that she didn't have the qualifications to drive a car of the same brand as Miss G's, who is our supreme deity, the Divine Lady. I have to comment that I don't like it when our protagonist goes out with other women, even though he has already said that she was his girlfriend, but it's just my personal thought. Following this, the protagonist said that she didn't have to pay for it, as he had said he would give her a car and it was time to keep his promise. They finally went to a dealership to buy her car. As soon as they enter, it didn't take long for them to be attended to, and the salesman asks if they had any preference in buying the vehicle, when she replies that the car was for her, and the budget she had was only 200,000, but she would still like a good-looking car. We see that his expression changed completely, quickly. Thus, he ordered another saleswoman saleswoman to attend to the young couple, and so she did. However, this ended up making the protagonist outraged with that, as the scum thought that their budget was too low and therefore didn't want to show them anything. Trying to evade what the protagonist was saying, the suspicious guy just said that he didn't know anything, so he didn't even have the obligation to give him an answer. Then the manager or owner of the place arrives, asking who was the owner of the Pagani that was outside the dealership. When the scum sees the machine that was outside, he was impressed by its beauty and value. When he asks the manager what had happened to the sports car, he replies that he would like to enter with his car, but the Pagani was blocking the entrance, so he had gone to ask if the owner of the vehicle could move it, so that he could finally put his car in. The protagonist then apologizes and said that he would move his car out of there shortly. When the salesman saw who the owner of the Pagani was, he couldn't believe what our protagonist had said. The protagonist also says that they were not welcome in that store anyway, so they were going to take a look at the store across the street. The manager then tries to convince him to stay there, saying that he was welcome in their store. Even the ignorant one from before was asking for another chance, saying that he had realized his mistake. However, it was too late, as the protagonist did have money to spend, just not in that store. This ended up causing the manager to quickly fire the guy from before, and one more person lost their job thanks to the presence of our protagonist. Upon leaving the dealership, Miss Ying apologized for embarrassing him, and that it was all her fault. However, he said that when he had joined the company at the beginning of the manhwa, if she hadn't guided him, he wouldn't have even been able to understand the company's workflow. Thus, she didn't need to be as polite as she was being. Leaving that conversation aside, he showed her a new car, worth almost 1.2 million. Upon seeing that beautiful car, she comments that if she went to work with it, people would think that she had found a rich man to support her. But he says that all that matters was whether she liked the vehicle or not. With a beautiful smile on her face, she replies that she did like it. He says that they would take that one then, thus asking for someone to put it on the card. Since she hadn't driven for a long time, he said that he would take her to practice when he had time. She thanks him for being so kind and considerate, in addition to having given her a beautiful car. However, according to him, that was just a car, and she didn't need to worry about it. After that, our protagonist decided to go out to meet with a young girl, who was apparently responsible for the work at the shipport he owned. It didn't take long for him to ask them to come in, so they could talk while eating something. When he asked how long it would take to complete the first phase of the renovation project, she replies that it would take around 2 months at least with the current schedule. However, as that would take too long according to him, he said that he would give her another 400 million. Therefore, she should hire more companies. Clearly, she ended up accepting, but in her thoughts, she said that she had never seen a client as generous as him. After that, he also comments that he had created a company called Ling Yun Group and asked for her help to create a logo, and in the end, she ends up accepting. Also asking what the location of the company was, and he replies saying that it was in the Twin Towers. She then says that he was a very promising young man, as the towers had just been completed, and that was an important milestone for Zongai, asking if he had any other design requests for the group's logo. When he mentions that she should change the name to Ling Yun Building on the logo, she says that he even had the right to use the Twin Towers, but it was not appropriate for her to change the name of the building. Upon hearing this, he mentions that there was nothing wrong with that, as he had paid for the Twin Towers in full. Shocked by the news, at first she couldn't believe that he had bought the entire towers. However, as this protagonist is completely humble, he didn't even show any emotion when saying that they were just 2 buildings, and there was no reason for her to be so surprised. After hearing what he said, she apologized for having acted that way before, and asks if he was busy that day, asking if he wouldn't like to go to her house for a coffee. However, according to him, he was busy and would leave it for next time. After being rejected, they finally say goodbye, and she says that she would send the project status to his email. However, as soon as she leaves, we see Director Sue completely beside herself, even being carried by an employee of the place. Upon seeing her, he asks what she was doing there, and she just comments that it was a big coincidence that they met there. The employee of the place says that she had been deceived by a man who ran away with his mistress, and she had had a few drinks to vent. Thus, he should take her home, as he knew her, leaving the problem only for the protagonist and getting rid of complications. Upon taking her in his arms, he asks where she lived to be able to take her to her residence, but she just started to complain, saying that people show themselves to be good people, but in the end, it was all just a lie. However, Lin said that it wasn't like that, and I think someone needs to warn her before it's too late, because he's even worse. At one point, she ended up mentioning that the protagonist was much better than her ex. Inside the car, he continued to ask for her address to be able to take her home. However, she didn't want to go home, and with no other options, he decided to take her to the Peninsula Hotel. Arriving there, the hotel's general manager asks if he had already conquered the director as well. After all, only a few days had passed since his presence at the school to help the protagonist. but he plays it cool, telling him to get the best suite in the place for them and to prepare some drinks as well. Once inside the room, she continued to enjoy the rest of the day to drown her sorrows. Soon she jokes with him, asking if he was afraid of her or something, then saying that she had a surprise for him. However, the only thing I can tell you is that if you want to know what happened, you'll have to read the story, especially since unfortunately I can't say or show what actually happened. After that, the system girl appears again, but completely embarrassed for having seen him like that. But despite all that, she still tells him that his previous job as a teacher had already been 70% completed, and if he wanted, he could already start a new job. After accepting what she had said, he would now be an express delivery man. In addition, as a reward, he won 10 million, a limited edition Tamburini T12 motorcycle, and motorcycle riding skills. Apparently, he liked this profession of delivery man more than being a professor at a university. She mentions that the motorcycle was parked in the hotel's parking lot, so he could go check it out. Having completely changed clothes to be able to ride his new motorcycle, he was enchanted with the beauty of that machine in front of him. Not to mention that the motorcycle cost around 6.5 million in their currency, and was very beautiful too. After that, he decided to go out with the motorcycle to make his debut. Then we see director Sue coming out of somewhere, and when she realizes who it was on the motorcycle, she was enchanted. And soon the heartthrob also appears, completely stealing the scene. The beautiful lady then thanks him for what happened the day before, but he just said that it was better for her to drink a little less next time. In addition, she asks why he had never gone to the university with that motorcycle, not to mention that all the female students were looking at him a short time ago. However, he replies that that was a place to study, and not for him to be showing off. But if that's the case, she still asked why he had gone with it that day then. He replied that he had only gone there to resign, so it didn't matter what he was driving. Worried about the reason, she asked why all of this so suddenly, and if it wasn't because of what happened the day before. But he says no. When she asks the reason that had made him leave that job, he said that he was now going to work as a delivery man. As he was very rich and was still going to work with deliveries, she asks if she was authorized to place some orders from him in the future. I believe I don't even need to comment on this. After that, she says that she would take him to the HR department so they could take care of the paperwork. It didn't take long and he already received a new order on the app, and even he was impressed, as he had just registered and had already received orders. As the work couldn't wait, he soon went to deliver the order he had just received and meets a music teacher from Zongai. Next, her spoiled son also appears, complaining that the protagonist had delivered the purchase too quickly as he hadn't even managed to play a little. With that, the protagonist mentions that it was good for him to practice the piano and that it was good for him to understand his mother's good intentions. But if it was so good, the young man then asked why he didn't practice. Realizing the arrogance of the boy from before, he ends up saying that he had indeed practiced, but initially the young man didn't believe him, as the piano was normally a noble instrument. Thus, the protagonist possibly couldn't afford to play it. The brat's mother then appears, apologizing for the way her son was acting, as she had spoiled him too much. However, he says that it was okay, and that he really could play. Thus, he asked if he could show his skills on the piano. She said that he could feel free to show them, but her son was already at a level above the 8th grade, well above the level of ordinary children. The protagonist replies to the lady, saying that he was self-taught, but he could play anything above the level of a small child, no problem. In case you don't know, a self-taught person is one who instructs himself by his own effort, without the specific help of a single master or tutor, or something similar to that. The spoiled young man insisted on telling his mother to let him try. However, the protagonist says that if he plays better than him, he should obey his mother obediently and practice the piano well. Confident that Lin would never beat him in terms of talent, he ended up accepting his proposal, and finally, he prepared to be able to start playing something. In the protagonist's thoughts, he was saying that he hadn't played that thing since he received the wisdom of the sages. It didn't take long for him to finally start giving a beautiful live show for the mother and son. So much so that she was impressed, as that was the 9th most difficult piece in the world, being too complex even for more experienced musicians. After finishing, she says that he was really hiding gold, as not even a university professor like her was capable of playing something like what he played. In addition, the protagonist asks if now the young man would listen to his mother and go practice. But the young man started to make excuses, thinking that Lin was a student of her mother pretending to be a delivery man, just to deceive him. However, he really didn't know the young man's mother, so he asks if he wouldn't be a sore loser. This ended up making the young man outraged, and he decided to dedicate himself to his studies this time, not accepting that he had lost to a simple delivery man. Next, the young man's mother thanks him, and comments that she believed that with his level, he could perfectly be able to switch to a better paying job, more specifically related to the piano. However, he replies, saying that he did not intend to change jobs for the time being, so he would not bother her anymore and would leave. But before that, she asked if she could add him on the neighboring social platform to later contact him when necessary, and he ends up accepting. accepting. After that, he received a reward for getting 5 stars on his first order, and this reward included Mumbai Beach. Thus, he would now be able to connect the Kyushu Pavilion and the Ujjain Terminal area. Not much time passed, and he received a call, and the person said that they were part of the management team of the beach he had just acquired. The person asked when it would be better for him to go to them and carry out the formalities, and as he was free at that moment, he decided to go there quickly. Arriving there, he is greeted by a girl named Tina, and it was she who had contacted him before. After also properly introducing himself to her, she handed him some contracts and documents for the technical area. He could check if there were any errors. The protagonist then asks the reason why Mumbai Beach, a public property, was being privatized and auctioned. The girl replies that it was actually because of the maintenance cost, so they thought it better to leave its care to third parties. But the owners of the beach apparently had a dark past, and now they had no choice but to auction the beach. But still, Lin was not the real owner of it. He would only be its owner for just 70 years, and after that, the contract would have to be renewed. He then asks if he should negotiate with the manager of Mumbai for the next use, and she replies yes, and also gives their location. After that, he decides to make a call to one of his employees, asking what he knew about Mumbai Beach. The young man mentions that that place was a bit problematic, not to mention that they still owed more than 200,000 to Lin's company. Upon hearing this, he ordered the young man to gather all the debts they owed, and they would go get them immediately to resolve this. Arriving there, apparently things seem to be normal, besides it being a company. Soon they are greeted by 2 company henchmen, asking what had brought them there, not to mention that it was their own legs. The young man says that he was looking for their manager, but according to the young men, he was not there, trying to deceive the protagonist and his assistant. But as the manager's car was still there, he didn't believe what the henchman said. He also introduces the protagonist as the new owner of the Vanja terminal and Mumbai Beach as well, so that visit was not just because they owed money. After hearing this, the henchmen completely changed their expressions, saying that they would take them to their boss's office, but the protagonist ended up losing his patience and threw the documents on them, then saying that they would not go to the office. Therefore, they were to tell their boss to remove his men from Mumbai Beach, not to mention that they were to pay what they owed him as soon as possible, telling them not to harm the peace they had over such a trivial matter. After that, the henchmen go to their boss's office, telling him what had recently happened, and passing on the message that the protagonist left with them. However, the guy who was the boss there, named Eldon Lai, was annoyed with what his henchmen had just told him. Upon hearing that he was also the owner of the ship terminal, he was impressed with his attitude. When one of the men there comments that the other side apparently didn't want to show their face much, the real owner of the beach says that he would go the next day to end the protagonist's business. Following this, Lin had gone to the Peninsula Hotel to find out about the debts, and the general manager asks when he would like to check the accounts, and he would soon send someone to prepare the papers. However, he then asks if the Peninsula Hotel has any unpaid debts that the manager had not been able to recover. He then replies that there were indeed some unpaid debts, totaling about 3 million. The protagonist then asks the reason why the manager hadn't mentioned this to him before, but he replies that this was a complicated matter to talk about, as the people who owed them were people they couldn't afford to mess with. Upon checking better who owed them, he discovered that Kim's name was also on the list. The manager, upon seeing that Lin was going to call young Kim, began to despair, saying that their family was not someone for them to pick fights with. Not to mention that young Kim had taken some girls there the night before, and they still hadn't paid, so they were possibly still at the hotel. As soon as Kim answers, the protagonist mentions the debt he owed to the Peninsula Hotel in the amount of 118,000. But the young man asks why Lin cared about that, since he wasn't the owner of the Peninsula Hotel. However, he replies that he was indeed the owner of the hotel, and if he paid him now, he would let Lin stay there for free. Upon hearing that the protagonist was there, he couldn't believe it, and started to get ready to meet Lin quickly. An employee ends up appearing, saying that there was a man named Eldon Lai at the reception, wanting to talk to young Lin. Speaking of him, he appeared with a possible gift and with his henchmen as well. When the security guard saw that number of people in the protagonist's room, he notified the head of security to gather all the hotel's security guards outside on the ground floor and wait for his call. After that, the guy who owed the protagonist threw a gift on his table, saying that it was a small token of his appreciation, as they would do great things in the future. But at no time did the protagonist say that he would like to do business with him. The debtor then mentions that he had come to see the protagonist personally, and couldn't believe that he had received him with that face. In addition, he said that he would make things clear, and if they didn't reach an agreement that same day, the protagonist would not be able to do business in the future. As he didn't have a very good life, he He told the protagonist for them to enjoy their time and see who would come out worse from all this. Realizing that this was a threat, Lin made the guy headbutt the table, even breaking the cup that was there. When his henchmen also went after the protagonist, with just one kick he managed to knock one of them out, causing him to be thrown against the wall shortly after. The debtor then tells Lin not to be stupid, but the protagonist decided to send him a message, saying that he knew about all the unpleasant things they always did. In addition, he was not only the owner of the beach and the terminal, but also the owner of that hotel, and all the security guards who were downstairs were his personnel. Only when the suspicious guy checks the window for the number of security guards waiting for them did he realize that Lin was not a person to be trifled with. As the guy in front of him knew the underworld better than the protagonist, he mentions that as long as he paid people to do what he wanted, the debtor could already imagine what could happen to him. Next, young Kim also arrives, asking what they were doing there, showing that he was known to them. The guy who owed the protagonist began to say that they had a problem with Lin about some business matters and was asking for his help, but Kim asks the protagonist directly what was happening and if those guys were really worthy of talking business with him. When they realized the friendship the two had, they didn't know how to react at that moment. Lin then says what the young men had said, saying that they were going to ruin his business. After that, Kim asks who was the idiot who had said that. According to Kim's analysis, it couldn't be the one in black clothes, as he wouldn't have the courage to do that, so that only left the freeloader from before. According to Kim, not even he was worthy of talking business with Lin, so he ordered them to leave there immediately, even causing the henchmen to ask who the protagonist was to have such authority. But Kim quickly ordered them again to leave the place immediately. But before that, Lin asked if they were going to pay him what they owed, and they replied that they would come back with the money and would definitely pay everything they owed. Young Kim asked the protagonist if he would like him to send someone to teach them a lesson. But according to him, there was no need for that, as they were just a bunch of people who weren't worth his time. Since he had just helped Lin, the young man proposed that he forget the 100,000 debt he had with him. But the protagonist asks if he even had any shame. But according to Kim, those who do business couldn't have that sort of thing, convincing Lin to let his debt be settled. Following this, he received a call from the divine lady, asking if he was busy, but he replies that he had quit his job. She asked if he had actually been fired for conquering a student. Admired by the way she saw him, he just replies that he liked to experience life. So after the experience, he simply changed jobs, and now he was working doing deliveries. She then decides to place her order, and he replies saying that he couldn't refuse an order from her. At that moment, poor Kim was left alone, upset that the protagonist had completely ignored him. I confess that here I felt a little sorry for him, as he really seemed to see Lin as a friend, but it seems that only he thought so. Soon he went to meet the divine lady, and she praised him for being quick with his delivery. But he says that calling a man quick wasn't really a compliment, leaving her somewhat embarrassed, or perhaps just not knowing how to respond to that. When he asks if she would like him to take those things to her house, she replies that it wasn't necessary, because that place also had a kitchen, and from time to time when she needed it, she would ask the chef to open the kitchen for her. When she said she was going to show him her culinary skills again, he decided to take the reins of the situation, saying that she didn't need to worry, as he didn't want to eat steaks that day. As the wisdom of the sages also included skills in the kitchen, he decided to test it out. We see that his skills were truly at a professional level with these images, and a few minutes later, the feast was completely ready for them to taste. Even without tasting it, the divine lady was already completely enchanted with the menu, and her desire to attack was also great. In addition, she ended up praising him for his skills, as just from the smell, everything seemed very good. Upon hearing this, he asked her to start then, and he would get her a juice in the meantime. When he went to get her the juice, he ended up hearing a scream coming from the place where he left the divine goddess, and asks what had happened. But apparently, she was just impressed with the taste of his food, not to mention that it was better than any food from a 5-star restaurant she had ever eaten before. And she also asks how he was so good in the kitchen. He just plays it cool, saying that he didn't know, and could only say that he was a talented young man. According to the divine lady, he was even gaining weight, and was also out of breath. However, changing the subject, she asked what kind of reward he would like, but I think his actions already showed it instead of simply saying it. However, just in case there was still any doubt in her head, he said that he already had his reward right in front of him. After that, he asks why she had called him that morning, asking if something had happened. She replies that it was nothing serious. She just wanted him to go with her to see the Vongia terminal that afternoon. There's no denying that I get sad seeing her giving her heart to him, but he isn't doing the same and keeps finding a way to cheat. However, leaving the sadness aside, he says that he would go with her that afternoon to see the progress of the project. At this moment, we have a view of how the port is turning out, and she mentions that the estimated cost of the renovation would be around 300 million, more or less. And as she wouldn't want him to spend too much money, the Divine Lady says that he could save up to 1.5 billion, but he asks why, since he duly had that amount. The goddess replies by saying that their project was very large, and she really didn't want to spend all that money, so he could save it in case a setback or an emergency situation occurred at a critical moment. He even understood her concern, but said that she didn't need to worry about it, as he wouldn't do any of this if he didn't have the adequate money to invest. With that, she had no more excuses, and said that she would do as he wished then. After that, the Divine Lady says that she had analyzed the design groups, and it would be perfect if Mumbai Beach could be included in the renovation plan. As things were quite simple for him, he just says that all they had to do was buy the beach then. But the Divine Lady asked if he just thought he could buy the beach simply because he wanted to, especially because the beach was a government property apparently or something like that, and there was nothing he could do this time. Pulling his leg, he ended up giving in to her game, and just agreed with what the beautiful lady had said. She then comments that it wouldn't be fun to wear a bikini in a private pool, so it was better to sunbathe on the beach. In addition, she also says that she thought someone would give her a chance, referring to the protagonist, but apparently, she had overestimated him. As soon as one of Lin's employees noticed his presence, he ran up to him to report, also saying that Eldon Lai had paid the money he owed them, and the business on that side of Mumbai Beach was officially theirs now. This made the Divine Lady speechless, asking what they were talking about and if Mumbai was now his. He replies, happy as a clam, saying that what she had said was true, and asks if she wouldn't like to sunbathe, as she had said before, saying that he was very annoying and was always setting traps for her, and fortunately for him, she always fell for his tricks. We continue with the Divine Lady commenting on something with her boyfriend, saying that now that the Wanjiang terminal was all theirs, he could take her to the sea to play a little, when he had time, of course. He replies saying that he accepted her offer and that he would take the equipment to the location to teach her how to dive. After that, she mentions the fact that he wanted to create a foundation and that she had contacted some people for him. These people could take care of the formalities, and if he had no requirements about the location, she could get a good place for him. While holding his Divine Lady's hands, he said that she could help him with the formalities and about the location. It could be in the Lingyun building, which, if I remember correctly, were the twin towers he had acquired. Then, she asked if he hadn't bought the building as well, and he ended up admitting this time that yes, he had bought the building too. As he had to go to work, he asked her to be careful on her way home, but she said that he needed to take care of himself too, and finally they say goodbye. Right after the farewell, he received a new order, and the order said for him to buy 2 life buoys for girls for 200 each, regardless of the brand. As soon as he arrives at the place that sold the buoys, he made his request to the owner of the place, who offered the protagonist a buoy that cost 209, and he accepted and told the attendant to give him a receipt as well, since he was a delivery man and needed to present one at the end of each delivery. Soon the seller ended up mentioning that the main business of a company is to provide variety and good products to its customers, and asked the protagonist if he would like to be introduced to some rich women that the seller knew. This ended up making Lin suspicious of the extra businesses that the seller had, but soon he handed over what the protagonist had come to buy, and finally we see him going to make his delivery. Arriving at the beach, he called the young man who had placed the order before so that he could meet him somewhere to make his delivery. However, the young man said that he didn't have much time now, and that Lin should just take the buoys to him at a large red parasol. But as the beach was full of these parasols, he found himself completely lost among so many people. However, the young man who placed the order soon arrived with his companions to receive the package, but you could already see that the girl from before was enchanted with the protagonist. Then, she went to call her friend so she could see the stallion who was making the delivery for them. As soon as the other girl saw Lin, she immediately agreed with what her friend had said, and asked why he was making deliveries if he was already so handsome. But apparently, the young man ended up feeling the bitter taste of rejection, and didn't like it at all, then saying some negative things about our protagonist. But the girls already realized that it was just envy, as the protagonist had a handsome appearance, and this woman's store was looking for salesmen. She thought that he fit the requirements perfectly to work there. As he had successfully delivered their order, he told them the price of the 2 buoys, and asked them to test them as well. The pink-haired girl then asked if he didn't intend to change jobs, and mentioned the clothing store she owned, and would like someone like him to take care of it. But he replied that he wasn't very interested, and soon asked which of them was going to pay for the buoy. boys. Soon we see an insignificant brat upset with life just because the boys were slightly over the price he had actually requested, and on top of that, accused the protagonist of profiting from the price differences. As if the previous accusation wasn't enough, he also said that Lin was forging fake receipts and had bought a cheaper buoy than he had actually asked him to buy. As a self-respecting billionaire that our protagonist is, he asked if the young man thought that Lin was short on money, since that amount was nothing to him. Clearly, this made the little boy angry, saying that Lin seemed quite confident, and asked if he thought he was richer than the young scum. But the girl told him to forget all that, and that she would pay for the buoys. As it was the ungrateful scum who had invited the girls, he refused to let her pay for anything. Therefore, he ended up deciding to give the money to Lin. However, as soon as he received the amount in his hands, he realized that he had only given him 400, and there was still 18 missing, since both boys were 209. However, the scum soon said that it had nothing to do with him, not to mention that he told Lin to buy the boys for 200, and was not going to pay for the extra money he had spent. The blue-haired rattlesnake was apparently on the simp's side, as he was apparently her little dog. Then, the protagonist hands the money to the beautiful lady with pink hair, who by the way was not toxic like the other one next to her, and told her that since her friends didn't have much money, she should consider the buoys as a gift to her, and wished the young lady a good day. But as soon as he turned his back to leave, the simp from before got angry that Lin had implied he was poor, and on top of that, he bragged, saying that his company made over 2 million a year. Upon hearing this, the protagonist said that at least he wouldn't be so stingy over just a few yuans, which was their currency. The young man from before decided to play a trick on the protagonist, saying that there was one more thing he would like to buy, and asked if he would dare to accept his request. However, as there was nothing in the world he wouldn't dare to accept, the beautiful lady ended up saying that it was better for Lin not to bet with the simp, as he probably couldn't win. But the toxic anaconda asked whose side she was on, leaving the young woman not knowing how to answer this insignificant girl's question. When Lin decided to check the order that the young man from before had placed for him, he was speechless at first. However, we soon see that the little boy's order was for him to buy a Ferrari 812, and the toxic simp said that he would give him the money as soon as he arrived with the car. You can already see that these two poisoned individuals make the perfect pair, just of insignificant scums, but still, Lin accepted the order and said that he would bring the Ferrari to him. The scum from before was then offering a drink to the beautiful lady who defended the protagonist earlier, but she refused to accept anything from him at the moment. Soon it was the anaconda's turn, saying that it was all just for them to have fun, and asked why she had that look on her face. But she replies that she found their previous attitude too ruthless, and there was no need for it. When the simp saw that she was defending the self-respecting Sigma, he was surprised that his friend was doing that. Speaking of the supreme alpha male, superiority in person, he arrived next with a briefcase of documents. The toxic young man soon went to greet the protagonist, asking how he dared to have the courage to come back there, and that he wouldn't make things too difficult for Lin. He just had to call him boss 3 times and that whole mess would be over. But he ended up receiving a warning from the beautiful young lady who won my respect, and she said that he didn't know when to stop and was already crossing the line to humiliate the young protagonist. But the anaconda, an affiliate of the little guy with the flaming pitchfork, defended the scum from before, telling her friend who the simp from before was and the power he possessed. However, the beautiful lady couldn't just stand by while he threatened people in that way. Right after hearing all this, Lin dropped all the documents that were inside the briefcase from before and ordered the people from the truck to bring the young man what he had ordered, thus showing the Ferrari 812, exactly the same one he had placed an order for with Lin a short time ago. And then he asked him a question, since he was a very rich little boy, if he could really afford to pay for that car. However, he soon admitted that he didn't have that much money to be able to pay, and then mentioned the fact that he wanted to bet, but lost. Thus, the protagonist just wanted him to kneel 3 times for him and everything would be resolved. Outraged for losing, he said that he would take the loss that time, but would like to see how Lin would handle the next problem he was about to create. In addition, the young man asks Lin if he had ever heard the name Dom on that side of Mumbai Beach, but he pretended not to know anything, already about to imagine what was to come. Then, the scum makes a call to Dom, saying that he offered 100,000 for them to bring people who could help him solve a problem. After the call, the toxicity in person who didn't know when to stop told Lin to wait, as brother Dom would be there in just a few minutes. The beautiful lady then told Lin that since he didn't go to that place often, it was better for him to run away, as he couldn't fight against those people that the simp from before had called, but he replies, saying that it was okay. A short time after the simp's call, we see that the people who received a lesson from Lin before went to the young man, and soon he showed them who the guy was who was bothering him, saying that he needed their help. The boy started to think too highly of himself, and said that he would like to see how long the protagonist protagonist could manage to keep that arrogant face of his. When Lin asks if the young man thought that bringing them there would help him in any way, we see that the guys who had just arrived were completely surprised to have seen Lin again. In addition, they soon showed due respect for our protagonist, leaving the young man from before not knowing what was really happening. As they were trying to get Lin out of Mumbai, he mentioned that less than a day had passed and they were already creating problems again, then asking if they had ignored his words before. However, their leader soon began to apologize to Lin, saying that they were wrong. The young simp was asking what was happening, and soon received a good kick. The guy he thought was there to teach Lin a lesson ended up saying that the protagonist was actually the owner of the entire Mumbai beach and the One Jam terminal as well. And since the young man still risked creating problems there, apparently he had given up on living. This left both girls from before completely surprised with the recent news. After teaching a lesson to the previous scum, Dom asked how Lin would like them to handle that problem, and they would do anything. He then replies that he didn't want much since the young man wanted to kick him out, and he just wanted the toxic being to kneel before him 3 times and call him boss. Upon hearing this, they asked the boy if he would need help to do that, and one of them said that 3 times would not be enough to punish the scum for his sins. But it didn't take long for the young man to get on his knees and do what Lin had previously asked. After that, the protagonist said that he would let it all slide this time. In addition, he also told the young men that if they didn't have enough to eat in the future, they could look for a person he knew, and he would get a job for them. Clearly, they thanked the protagonist deeply. The beautiful lady from before said that she would like to leave, but as she hadn't come by car, she asked if he could give her a ride. He ended up agreeing to give the girl a ride, but asked if it wasn't better for her to change first, especially since it wasn't appropriate for her to go in a bikini. But she said it was okay, and as it was very hot that day, it would be cooler. The toxicity in person arrived next as well, asking if she could also go with them, as she hadn't brought her car either. But Lin said that the motorcycle only had room for 1 person, and if she really wanted to go, she should get in that truck, and the driver would take her. As soon as the girl from before got on his motorcycle, he felt an overwhelming pressure behind him, pushing him forward, if you know what I mean. This time it was the system girl's turn to appear in a bikini, saying that he had completed 3 orders and received 3 5-star reviews. Thus, the career completion was at 40%, and his reward was 1 billion, also unlocking a new mission. And as he received a nice reward, he gave a reward to the system lady as well. As soon as he sees the amount being deposited into his account, the girl from before accidentally ended up seeing the amount of 1.5 billion in the protagonist's account, being surprised by the amount he possessed. A short time later, she mentions that she had accidentally seen the balance in his account, which was 150 million according to her, and says that not even her clothing store's account had a fraction of his money. But he says that she must have misread something, and that it was actually 1.5 billion, leaving her completely surprised and thinking that she had found some kind of divine blessing. As soon as she arrives at her clothing store, we see the beautiful lady well dressed, and he asked if that store was hers. She then replies that she had a degree in fashion design from Manhwa University, and asks if he would like to drink something. As he still had some things to do, he had to politely refuse, and says that he would take one of her business cards. She then told him that he didn't need to take the card, and could simply add her on the neighboring platforms. But he wasn't referring to that, but that his company might need some uniforms in the future, and when the time came, he would place some orders with her, and she clearly says that it would be a huge pleasure to serve him. As soon as he leaves the store, Lin receives a call from an old classmate, saying that he was going to Zangai in a few days. As the young man hadn't seen the protagonist in half a year, he was missing him a lot, and this made Lin find his friend's manner suspicious. The protagonist's friend then asks if he knew Cisco, a company that manufactured chips like his. In addition, the young man said that they had solved a control unit problem, which would allow them to take a 10x greater leap in the field of domestic chips, and he was going to talk to him about business right now. But Lin said that he couldn't talk to him for a while, and as soon as he arrived, he should contact the protagonist, and he would receive the young man. After hanging up the phone, Lin quickly got on his motorcycle to go to the research institute he owned. In his thoughts, we see him saying that he had created the source code base a few days ago, and it didn't make sense for Cisco to be one step ahead of them in development. As soon as he arrives, we see the beautiful researcher lady from before, and she was surprised that he was there suddenly. He then replies saying that he was there to see how they were doing, and she says that the control unit program was complete. However, there was a small problem in one of the frequencies or something like that. A short time later, he arrived at the place where the senior researcher was also, and he tells him what he had recently heard about Cisco, which had developed a control unit program. This news ended up leaving both of them completely speechless upon hearing what Lin had said. He also says that according to what he knew, Cisco had made great progress because it had hired a specialized technician, and this person was precisely Lu Shu, the one Lin had fired when he took over the research institute. Clearly, they were surprised to hear that their former teammate was now on the competition side. But the girl from before told Lin not to worry, as she knew his skills and could guarantee that there were flaws in his programming. But Lin commented that apparently that girl was somewhat lacking in knowledge and asked her who she thought the market would believe. He also asked if she had applied for any patents or anything like that. The girl, lost upon realizing the mistake she had made, asked if it would do any good if they registered the patent now before they published it. However, Lin replied that the initiative was no longer in her hands, and they surely must have already registered it. When the time came, they would simply be the laughing stock of the entire industry. This made the poor girl from before completely floored, thinking that it would possibly be the end of her career at that moment. But soon the old man from before said that it was his fault, so if they had to fire someone, it should be him instead of his partner. However, Lin replies saying that there was no reason to fire them, not to mention that he could compensate for that loss, so they shouldn't worry about it, as it had already passed. The old man then said that it was their responsibility, as they were careless enough to let their rivals take advantage of them. However, the protagonist soon stood up and told them to get to work, leaving both in doubt about what he was talking about. Although Cisco had stolen their technology, that was only version 1.0. Therefore, it was time to create an improved and even more complete version than the previous one. They said that they would do their best to assist him in this. Soon, he embodied the spirit of wisdom in him and began to produce a new program or something, leaving both there impressed with their boss's skills. This time, it took a little over 12 hours for the process to be completely concluded, and he was completely exhausted as well. Not to mention that, according to him, if he continued to program, he would end up going bald. After concluding everything, Lin said that they would need to find a way to get Dutch lithography machines, and this would be their priority from now on. Soon the old man said that he would make some calls and would resolve that matter as soon as possible. But when Lin referred to the girl from before, she was afraid of what would come next for her as punishment. But he just told her to develop a new portable system as soon as possible, and that he needed a system that was not inferior to Apple's. With pride, she said that she would do what he asked, and for him not to worry either, as she would complete the task he gave her at all costs. With the hug, he ended up motivating his employees to work even more agilely, and also said that they could really change the history of the chip monopoly in foreign countries. In addition, the future would be a new page for them. After that, the protagonist decided to leave and let his employees work on their research, and both were amazed by Lin's kindness, even thinking that their country had a promising future. This time, Lin was in his Pagani, which many here say was a Ferrari, and I don't even know which is which anymore, but I'll just keep calling it a Pagani. He received a new order on his app. Clearly, he quickly went to make his delivery, and it didn't take long for him to reach his destination. But apparently, this would be another problematic customer, as he had seen a 50% discount in the store, and thought that what he had ordered would be cheaper than the final price. However, Lin replies that the promotion he had seen before actually happened the day before. This one also thought that the protagonist was making profits on top of the real value, but he said that he had a receipt there, and it was only a few hundred yuan, so he wasn't trying to deceive him or anything. Soon, a lady appears saying that it was okay since it was just a few hundred yuan, and she just asked her husband not to give people any trouble. Then, the husband says goodbye to his wife to go to his night shift, and when the protagonist was leaving, the scum told him to take out the trash, as if he had any obligation with the scum's duties. Speaking of obligation, that's exactly what Lin said, that he had no obligation to do that. The guy from before ended up threatening Lin, saying that he wouldn't give a 5-star review if he didn't help, and would also complain about him, but he continued to ignore the scum and said that he could do whatever he wanted. But before Lin could leave, the subject continued to say that he would complain about him, but was completely ignored by our self-respecting Sigma. As soon as the protagonist got outside the building, he met a worker picking up trash on the street, thinking that that was indeed a hard job to do. In addition, the young man was almost kicking the bucket carrying a table that was twice his size, and Lin, upon seeing that scene, decided to help the hard-working young man. At that moment, we discovered that this young man was actually a delivery man like Lin, and he asked if the young man couldn't simply refuse some orders. But he said no, and if he didn't receive a good review, half a day's work would be in vain. According to the young man, few customers like Lin help, but he said that they they weren't customers, but rather they made deliveries just like the young man. Then, the scum from before appeared once again, asking why he hadn't left yet. On top of that, he continued to talk about Lin's 5 stars and that he would complain about him too, as always. But the protagonist said that he didn't care much about it, as he didn't want to be ordered around by inferior beings like him. This ended up making the subject completely irritated, and he called the protagonist arrogant and smelly, bragging about being a sales manager at a chemical company. In addition, the guy said that he could pay for the protagonist with his car, and Lin asked if he had gone so crazy as to break an A6. But as soon as Lin showed the beautiful sports car he had with him, it made the guy rethink his recent attitudes. He asked Lin why he worked as a delivery man if he was so rich, but he replied that it was his right to be able to experience life, and as he had said that he was a sales manager at a chemical company, Lin said that if he continued to treat people like that, his end would probably come very soon, especially because he was also in that line of work, and this made the scum from before get on his knees, completely changing his arrogant attitude from before, saying that he would never do something like what he had done that day again. After all this trouble, Lin received a new order, where basically he had to buy emergency contraceptive drugs, but as soon as he saw that order, he felt that that delivery would also be tiring. But still, he went to the location to make the delivery he had just received. However, as soon as the person opens the door, he couldn't believe that it was precisely the girl he liked the least. Exactly the same person who had humiliated him a short time ago, his former schoolmate. She asked why he was making deliveries. He then asked what was wrong with that and gave the final price of the delivery. However, the girl began to think that Lin had lost all his money and now all that was left for him to do was deliveries. However, he replied that he was sure that what he did or didn't do, she certainly didn't care. Thus, he would leave as soon as she paid him, but that was not enough, and the girl continued to try to humiliate Lin in every possible way, saying that he would never be able to do business with his level of skill and other things too. After that, she threw his contraceptive drugs on the floor, saying that she didn't want them anymore and wanted to return the order. However, he simply ignored all that and told her not to regret it later, as a child could be on the way. As the little poisoned anaconda had nothing better to do with her life, she told Lin that she was going to take some pictures of him. As soon as he asked the reason why she was doing all this, she said that because he had completely failed in his business, she had to share that news with their classmates. Suddenly, the general manager of the Peninsula Hotel appears, asking the girl to take the pills right away. But when he sees his boss in front of him, he asked what Lin was doing there. The toxic girl then began to say that he was her ex-classmate and had earned a lot of money but lost everything recently, and now he was doing deliveries. But this made the general manager teach the girl a lesson, asking how she dared to tarnish Lin's image in such a way, then saying that he would delete her from the face of the earth. She then asked why he was doing this since Lin was bankrupt and couldn't compete with him. However, the general manager quickly said that he was just experiencing life and asked her to stop acting like an ignorant person. Quickly, the general manager began to apologize to Lin on behalf of the girl, and he simply said that it was okay, but he asked him to keep that girl away from him in the future, and also asked for the 5 stars on the app. As soon as he left the place, he received the review he had asked for, and we see again the general manager continuing to teach the rattlesnake a lesson, saying that because of her stupidity, she had almost ruined his business. As that order had been very quick, there was only 1 more day left and he would complete the career mission. Then he received a call from the Supreme Goddess, who asked him to go to her house if he was free and to prepare something good for her to eat, and he said that he would be at her house in a short while. However, the divine lady asked him to meet her at the supermarket as she didn't have any ingredients at her house. Arriving there, we see a completely stunning, angelic being, and soon she showed a beautiful smile upon seeing her boyfriend. She mentions that she had heard that a supermarket had opened there, and as he was a diamond rank member at that place, they would probably get a discount on their purchases. After that, they finally entered the supermarket to buy some ingredients, but at one point, he asked if they were there to buy food. When she replies yes, he asks why she had taken so many cakes and desserts then. With that, she said that a woman's mood depended a lot on a good dessert, and insisted that they go shopping. But he asked if her good mood wasn't actually because of him, and let's just say that this ended up making her embarrassed with the protagonist's comment. We continue with the protagonist doing his shopping with the divine lady, and from his expression, you could already see that he was not happy with it at all. But apparently, he would have to wait a little longer, as the beautiful lady still wanted to buy more meat, as she fell in love with the dish he made for her a few days ago. window. Suddenly, an old man arrives wanting to talk to the beautiful lady, saying he was an entertainment talent scout, and asked if she wasn't interested in getting into that business. In addition, he offered her his personal number, saying that she was very beautiful and would certainly have great success in that field. However, the protagonist quickly killed the guy's vibe, saying that she wasn't interested, and told him to ask the fish vendor if she accepted, since she had a good appearance too. But we see that in reality, it wasn't as Lin had really said. After that, the guy said that the protagonist couldn't interfere in the beautiful lady's affairs, and he guaranteed that she would be successful in that field, and mentioned that an actor currently earns over 100 million a year. She took this opportunity to provoke our protagonist a little, saying that an annual income of 100 million had piqued her interest a bit, and you could see that she got what she wanted. The talent scout said that if Lin really loved his girlfriend, it was better for him to let her follow her goals, and he replied that that was true, but only in 15 years. Not knowing why he had said that, the guy started to wonder why he had said only in 15 years. To clear up the subject's doubts, the protagonist said that he had 1.5 billion in his account, therefore he wanted to reserve her for 15 years, and that's if the guy still wanted to wait for her. Upon seeing the enormous amount of zeros in the protagonist's account, the young man began to sweat cold, as he didn't imagine he was dealing with a high-class big shot, and he told him to get in touch again only in 15 years. After that, he began to apologize, saying that he shouldn't be deluding himself so much, and finally decided to leave, giving the protagonist and the divine lady some peace and quiet again. The beautiful lady started to laugh at the protagonist and joked with him a little, asking if he could make an advance payment of 100 million, and he replies that the deposit could indeed be made. However, he would like to see the problem that night, regardless of what happened. Clearly, she had no way to respond to such a provocation, and simply tried to play it cool, but also told him that when he got home, he would see what's what. After hearing this, he mentioned something about 300 rounds and seeing if she would have that much energy, and as she felt challenged, she swore to herself that she would manage it. Arriving at the divine lady's house, he asked if she was really sure that her parents weren't home. She replies yes, and asks since when he was so shy. He replies that in fact, it was because he had already seen her parents so many times that meeting them at this moment would be too embarrassing. She then asks if he was embarrassed, and commented that she thought he was getting thinner every day. Thus, soon a simple puff of wind could make him fly away, and mentioned that she hadn't settled the score with him since the supermarket incident yet. Thus, he soon suggested that they finish the previously mentioned 300 rounds, and she was clearly prepared to make him pay for his crimes. In this part, I'll have to cut some things, but let's just say they took a moment to eat some grapes, and I think he had an opportunity to be well served by the divine lady, and this left her completely embarrassed with what he had just done. As the guy is trained in this art, he didn't even show any insecurity or shame in it. Before they could continue, she mentioned that when the foundation's formalities are completed, she would seek a funding of 10 million, which is the estimated value to support his project, and she would arrange for him to meet the people responsible for the foundation, and asked if the next day at noon was good. To get rid of the paperwork and the boring part quickly, he said that she could schedule it, but he was really excited to start the 300 rounds he had mentioned before. The next day, we see the beautiful lady telling him not to forget his meeting that day, and he asked her not to worry about it, as he wouldn't forget. Finally, they say goodbye to go to their jobs, and by the way, this time he was driving a Ferrari, which he had bought a short time ago. After that, he looked at his cell phone and saw the new order, but it said for him not to buy anything and simply go to the marked location. Arriving there, he realized that something strange was happening, and asked what was going on for the guy to have called so many people. Then thinking that possibly the guy there just wanted the delivery guys to help move his car that had gotten stuck. The guy is so unscrupulous that he was doing a live stream, and according to him, he had called 6 delivery guys to help him get his car out. And on top of that, he said that's how rich people thought. This is a true being that will never actually have any success in life. Speaking of a rich person, the protagonist appeared next, asking how he could think like a rich person acting in such a ridiculous way. The scum then began to hurry the protagonist, saying that he was the only one missing, and said that if they managed to get his car out of there, he would give them a 5-star review. However, the protagonist mentioned that he needed to find a few more people, and that only the 6 there would not be enough for that. The insect then asked if they didn't do weightlifting, and said that Lin was just trying to be lazy. This ended up making him outraged with the scum, and he decided to leave, as he saw that it would be a complete waste of time and a headache as well. The scum replied saying that if he continued with that attitude in his work, in 10 years he would still only be a delivery boy. However, a short time later, they heard the roar of a sports car's engine, and the insect from before was amazed by the Ferrari that was right in front of him. He then said to the delivery guys that that person in the car was a person who had a wealth mentality, and in the near future, that would also be his position. Or at least that's what he thought, until he saw our protagonist. And from his expression, you could see that he regretted having treated him in that rude way before. Lin then asks the scum if he was surprised to see him once more, and also said that if he continued to think like he thought a rich person thought, he would never be truly rich, then telling him to stop with all that nonsense pretending to be a successful person. After that, he realized that something strange was happening with his live stream, and it really happened as the protagonist had said, and now he was going to ruin in a few seconds for pretending to be a person he actually wasn't. Next, we see him meeting with the Divine Lady, and he asked where the people she had mentioned were since it was noon and they still hadn't arrived. But she, with a beautiful smile on her angelic face, told him to look behind him, and upon doing so, he realized that he was in front of a kitchen, and everything was already ready for him to just finish making the dish. Upon seeing that, he told the beautiful lady that he had already made her dinner the day before, and asked if she was now wanting him to make her lunch as well. In response, she guaranteed that when she learned how to cook, she would cook for him every day. With a beautiful smile and a beautiful proposal like that, he had no way to refuse, and soon prepared the dishes for them to eat, and apparently they were ready to taste that meal. After that, she heard someone knock on the door and asked the person to come in. At this moment, we see a girl called He Yuan Wan, who called the Divine Lady sister, accompanied by Qi Shanzhao. Then, she asked if they weren't going to meet only at 2 in the afternoon, so she saw no reason for the girl to be there so early. But according to the young woman, she didn't want to be late to meet her new boss. The girl then comments next that the beautiful lady had found a very handsome chef for the kitchen and was learning from him. Upon hearing this, Miss Ji asked if he looked like a chef to Yuan, and she replies that because he was so handsome, he certainly wasn't a chef, and asked if he was then her new secretary. When the Divine Lady was about to reveal who he really was, the protagonist ended up winking at her so that she wouldn't reveal who he actually was yet. Yuan then said that her sister didn't need to explain anything, and wanted to introduce her to young Zhao, whom she had met at an exchange in the United States, also mentioning that the young man had great business skills. When the Divine Lady greets the young man, she asks if he had already eaten anything, and also if they wouldn't like to join them in that meal. As a proposal like that couldn't be refused, we see that they quickly finish the dishes that the protagonist had recently made. According to Yuan, the protagonist's food was so good that she filled up quickly. In addition, the young man said that he didn't imagine that he knew the chip industry so well as he had mentioned, saying that Lin was a really amazing person. The young woman then mentioned that it was already 3 in the afternoon, and her new boss still hadn't arrived, then saying that apparently he didn't have much sense of time. At that moment, the Divine Lady ended up coughing, saying that her new boss was actually already there for a long time. This ended up leaving the girl confused, as she still hadn't seen him. But the beautiful lady finally introduced the protagonist, saying that he was the one who was the founder of the Lin Foundation. From their reaction, they had no idea that he was precisely the person they had been looking for all this time. After that, Yuan began to apologize, as she didn't want to have called him a cook a short time ago, but he told her not to worry, and now that he knew more about their true personalities, they could ask him whatever they wanted. Realizing this opportunity, she asked if his next business would have the foundation as its main focus, and what business plan he had. In response, he said that the foundation was not the main focus of his future business, and asked if they would believe him if he said that he actually wanted to dominate the entire world business scene. At that moment, a tremendous silence took over the environment they were in, until he asked if they would think he was just kidding. The Divine Lady also ended up commenting that every ambitious person was worthy of admiration, already looking at the protagonist with admiration apparently. The young man then said that he even had some questions for him, but after hearing the recent answer he gave, he was left speechless. Yuan also ended up being too enchanted with the boss, and said that although the cake was big, her new boss was still very handsome, and according to her, there was nothing wrong with that. But this comment and her recent facial expression ended up making the Divine Lady a little jealous apparently, and she scolded her friend. As the protagonist was a very generous person, he said that now that the cake had been uncovered, each of them would receive an annual salary of 5 million, and would receive dividends when the company went public. Excited with all that, Yuan said that he was a classic case of encouraging people with money, and that made her feel even more motivated to participate in that business. As for the young man, he was grateful to the protagonist for his generosity and consideration. In addition, for him, that salary was so high that it ended up making him a little embarrassed. According to Lin, money was not important, and what really mattered to him was the person's talent. Since they were veterans and wanted to go to war against the world with him, he certainly wouldn't treat them badly. After a beautiful toast in celebration of this new milestone, both parties took the opportunity to taste some beautiful wine. After the tasting, Lin said that he would take them to the location where the new company was, and would leave the future work to them. And Yuan said that she was looking forward to it. But the divine lady asked if she wasn't actually afraid that Lin would actually give her a small, dark room. But from the girl's reaction, a small, dark room would be just fine for her. At this point, we have a cut to the building, and Yuan asked if he had rented an office in the twin mansions. But when he answered that it wasn't that, she asked if he was in an intermediate building next door, as there were several high-end office buildings nearby. But he replied that he had actually bought the twin towers themselves, and once again he left his new employees speechless. The girl then began to try to use her charm on the protagonist, saying that she no longer wanted to be a financial director, and asked if he wasn't in need of a secretary, saying that she didn't have long legs like her sisters, but she could wear a short, straight silk dress. This comment from the girl made the beautiful lady act, and she asked if it would be worth sacrificing all that wealth just for a little ambition. Yuan then ended up hugging the divine lady, mentioning the fact that she was jealous of the protagonist. Next, he said that he would leave the rest of the work to them, and that there was 500 million in the company's fund. Thus, from now on, they were the ones who would take care of the business of that place, as he had his own work to do as well. Yuan ended up asking what other jobs he had, and if he wasn't working as a cook for other company owners, referring to the divine lady. But he ended up pulling his goddess to him, and replied that he was actually working as a delivery man now, and we see them having the same reactions that all the other people had. The beautiful lady then told them to go, as Lin was not just a rich man, and there were still more things for them to see. While Yuan and the young man were talking about the division of the company's departments and other things as well, we see the protagonist and the divine lady alone. He asked if they shouldn't transfer the Sonrisa group there, but she said that it would depend on whether he had the means to buy it or not. He ended up playing hardball, saying that he should start by acquiring the company's president then. She asked if he didn't have a general direction for his development and future planning, like real estate services, and his answer was no, but he believed in big numbers. After that, she asked another question, if he wanted to decide the next step in his development strategy based on big data and cloud computing, and he answered yes, then saying that what he wanted to do was actually not easy, and she gave him a suggestion, saying that he could enter as an investor first and create an investment company. After hugging the supreme goddess, he said that she was so smart that she had won his heart, but she played it cool, saying that she didn't know what he was talking about. In addition, she said that although Yuan had become his employee, her real identity was still that of the group's financial director. Therefore, he should take advantage of them and use them well, and he replied by telling her not to worry, as they were a resource that would be very well used. As if that wasn't enough, he joked with the beautiful lady, asking if she didn't intend to change careers, as he was still without a personal secretary. In response, she ended up leaving him breathless, telling him to think big, and told him to take her home, as she still had a lot of work to do at the office. Sometime later, we have a scene at the Zhanghai airport, and he was mentioning that the Bentley car, which had been bought by Zhang Qianlong, was very good, and apparently, he had finally finished the evaluation task. But suddenly, a huge glow began to come out of his cell phone until the beautiful system girl appeared, saying that his career progress was already at 60%, and as a reward, he got a lucky card, limited to 5 minutes. When he asked what a lucky card was, she replied that it was for the case of there being an extreme case in which he needed to change his luck. At the flight terminal, he realized that Zhang Song's flight was almost arriving, who was his friend from college, and we see him along with a grumpy girl. As it had been a long time since they had seen each other, Zhang Song ended up hugging his friend, saying that he had missed him a lot. The grumpy girl then asked what he was doing, since they were in an airport and people were looking at his recent attitude. As he hadn't seen his friend since they graduated, he didn't care much about what people said or thought. After that, he introduced his girlfriend to the protagonist, saying that her family was also from Zhanghai, and she had gone with him to see her family. As they were probably hungry, Lin suggested that they go eat something good. But we see that this girl was actually nothing more than a spoiled little rich girl, saying that she couldn't eat at stalls, as it was very unhygienic. But the boyfriend then asked what that was all about, since they always ate at stalls in college. To get out of this situation, she said that she had heard that a restaurant had opened nearby in Zhanghai, and asked why the protagonist didn't take them there to try it. But for Young Song, there was no need for them to go to such an expensive place. We discover at this moment that Zhang Song had told his girlfriend that Lin actually earned a lot of money in his real estate company, and apparently this scum was just wanting to take advantage of Lin as much as she could. But he replied that he was no longer in the real estate business, and that he was now actually a delivery man. However, the restaurant was still affordable, and he suggested that they go there. When Young Song heard what Lin said, he didn't believe it at first, as he was the best student among all of them in college. He asked why the protagonist didn't wait for him to sort out the things he he had to do there and go with him to Yanjin as he could help him financially. But the poisoned anaconda ended up showing her true colors, saying that he wasn't crazy to do that as she wasn't going to support him, and if he still took the protagonist there, she would definitely break up with him. But Lin said that it was okay, and they could stop fighting, especially since he was very well in Zhonghai and wasn't going to Yanjin. As soon as they arrive at the parking lot to get the car, they end up meeting another young man, and this clueless girl was calling him brother, asking what he was doing there. In response, he said that he had just seen a Bentley Sun parked inside, and took some pictures to send to his friends so they would know the reason for his delay, then thinking that they had disappeared, but actually ended up meeting them in the parking lot. And here we see the protagonist commenting to his friend, saying that although it wasn't ideal to meddle in family matters, those two really look like siblings. The toxic young man, just like his sister, asked if she hadn't bought a car in Yanjin, and mentioned that their mother would like them to have dinner at her house. Young Sun then said that he hadn't bought the car, as since the lazy girl didn't want to work, his salary was barely enough to pay the expenses, therefore the car was unfeasible. The scum then started to think too highly of himself, saying that he had worked for 2 years to buy the best of the best, and if he managed to do that, he asked why Sun couldn't. Clearly, this ended up leaving the young man embarrassed and feeling down after that unnecessary comment. To defend his friend, the protagonist said that her brother didn't have a car. However, he had one, and a car was just a car, and if it was so important, he would gift Sun one then. And soon they saw the Bentley responding to the protagonist's key, leaving the scum surprised with that. Sun then ended up asking his friend, also surprised, if that car was really his, and he proudly replied yes. The treacherous Medusa asked Sun how he could have a car like that if he was just a delivery guy according to the protagonist, but the young man also had no idea how that was really possible. The girl then began to play innocent, saying that they shouldn't eat at home and that it would be better if they ate together to get to know each other better, but he said that they were going to eat at a stall, so she probably wouldn't like it. Her toxic brother had the idea of him inviting everyone there for dinner, and when they got to know each other better, they would be good friends. The bitter rattlesnake, whom I would like to negatively praise with other words, ended up blaming her boyfriend, and since the guy was nothing more than a simp for women, he ended up telling Lin that they should go together. After a bit of silence, he told them to get in the car. When it was time to get into the vehicle, we can already see that the Medusa's brother was worthless, and Lin thought that in that family, there really were only toxic people. Once inside the car, the bitter girl was impressed with the interior of the Bentley, and her toxic brother was not far behind either, saying that common people wouldn't be able to get into an executive class car. After that, he even had the nerve to ask the protagonist to borrow the car in a few days, having just met him. According to him, he needed to go to a friend's wedding, and Lin gave him a frightening look, asking who his friends were. That was enough to put the scum in his place. But the Supreme Naja told her brother to rent a car, since Lin had said he was going to give that car to Sun. But this simp's attitude has honestly annoyed me a lot, and when she said that if he didn't accept the car, they would simply break up, he ended up shutting up. Simps like this only suffer in the future, and it seems this one's fate will be no different. After a while, they arrived at the Zhonghai food court. Entering the court, Lin commented to his friend that they used to go there all the time in school, and asked if his friend still remembered that, but he could never forget something like that, apparently. The simp then told his girlfriend to choose something she liked, but according to the scumbag, she didn't like that smoked food. But while the clownfish was playing hard to get, Lin was finishing placing his order. After that, he and his friend drank together, and he thanked the protagonist for his kindness and had many things to talk about with his friend. But the protagonist asked him to wait until they got to his house, and there they would talk better. However, he said it wasn't necessary, as the company would reimburse him for the accommodation. According to the scum of society, it was a great idea for him to stay at Lin's house, while she and her brother would go home. But still, he could make arrangements for the reimbursement and profit even more. But he said that wasn't good, and since Lin had a girlfriend too, it wasn't good for him to be bothering people. But the protagonist said he had broken up with the toxic girl from before a long time ago, and now lived alone. Thus, when the time came, they would have a second round. Following this, a driver suddenly appeared, asking if Lin had called for the driver, and upon replying yes, he said that they were going to the Kyushu Pavilion. The toxic siblings then began to plan something new, it seems, as that was actually the #1 residential area in Zhonghai. While they were on their way home, the scumbag told his sister that she had to get into the Kyushu Palace, no matter what happened, and it seems the snake already had a plan to make that happen. The story continues, with our protagonist staying outside the car, while the rattlesnake's brother sat right in the driver's seat taking his place, and the rest settled in the back seat. Clearly, he asked where the space for the car's owner was, since everyone there had already decided on their places. Next, he asks the treacherous Viper if Jang Song was going to stay at his house that night, and comments on the fact that she had said she was going to her family's house, but apparently changed her mind. She replies that she actually wanted to go with the protagonist because her boyfriend was dazed and she was a little worried about him. Pure lie. She actually just wanted to take advantage of the multi-millionaire protagonist in front of her. When she asks her boyfriend if he would like her to keep him company, the only thing he could answer was to call for his boss, who was the protagonist, and in the end, he just accepted that they go to his house. Arriving there, the rattlesnake was impressed with Lin's Kyushu pavilion, and his friend comments that that house must have cost a lot of money. As this protagonist is very humble, the only thing he said is that it didn't cost as much as he thought, just about $1 billion. If there's one thing this guy doesn't lack, it's humility. After hearing this, both were completely surprised by the value of that residence, and suddenly the general manager who took care of the pavilion arrives to welcome his boss, also saying that some things had just arrived for the barbecue and he would send them right to the residence. Happily, Lin gives his school friend a hug and comments that it had been a long time since they had a barbecue together. Thus, now that he was sober again, they would go for a second round, and of course the guy wasn't going to refuse an offer like that, especially in a house like that. After that, he decided to go out to get the wine first, and while he was out, the Viper struck again. She asked Jang Song who his boss was, and if he was a little-known rich guy. The young man replies that he was also surprised, especially since he had no idea he had all that amount of money, especially for acting so normally in college. This anaconda wastes no time, and says that because he was very rich, the young man should stay with him. In addition, he had also commented that he would give her boyfriend a car, and he should accept it. However, this young man's attitude made me admire him even more, because the guy is a true friend. He replied to that worthless person, saying that he could never do that because it was too expensive a gift to accept. Furthermore, he was his boss, not his father. Thus, he was not automatically obliged to take care of him. That alone was enough to put that toxic, disposable being in her place. But the Naja doesn't give up easily, and says that she realized her boyfriend couldn't hold his own. Therefore, she would have to do it alone, and according to her, she would make Lin fall at her feet. While the barbecue was happening and they were enjoying it, the centipede says she was going to the bathroom, as she needed to relieve herself a bit. Get ready for drama. You can't expect anything good from this treacherous Medusa. While our respectable protagonist was choosing a good wine to taste, the Jararaka arrived next, wanting to talk to him about something. Basically, she wanted to have some tea. But jokes aside, she comments that our protagonist seemed to be single now. He already thought that the dog was about to start acting, thinking it would probably be adultery or robbery. He was already prepared to act against toxic people like her, especially since it wasn't the first time he had met people like that. To shut the non-recyclable being's mouth, he shows a picture of his girlfriend, who by the way is the most beautiful so far in this series, without a shadow of a doubt. On top of that, he says that she was the president of the Sunrisa Group, which was worth about $1 billion, and asks the rattlesnake if she thought she had anyone better in mind. After that, the girl decided to play hardball and asked if he didn't miss having lovers, saying that from the first time she saw him, she fell in love and wanted to be with him. Clearly, this girl still didn't understand the situation she was in, as she decided to make such a flashy appeal. But calm down, the situation is about to get even worse. At that moment, our protagonist was fighting against his instincts, thinking that this was not a game but a direct attack. And if he wasn't careful, he would end up having nowhere to fall. After seeing that scene, he tells the Medusa that her body was nothing special besides a rotten piece of meat, therefore it was better for her to save her efforts. The rattlesnake, then, didn't know where to put her face after receiving such a sincere compliment from our protagonist, who even adds next that she disgusted him. In addition, of course, that Viper didn't deserve to be Zhang Song's friend, and comments that the door behind her was the service entrance, so it was better for her to leave there immediately. This, yes, is a true friend. The Naja told him not to exaggerate, otherwise he would regret it. But a guy who had everything at his disposal said that he really didn't know what he could regret, especially since the rattlesnake had nowhere to be buried compared to him. As she no longer had any arguments to deal with our protagonist, she began to scream, calling him a pervert. The one who came running to see what was happening was precisely our protagonist's partner. As soon as the young man arrives, she says that she had gone to use the bathroom, and Lin ended up taking advantage of the situation and tried to do something suspicious. She may be worthless, but this anaconda knows how to put on a good show. However, as the young man knew his friend and brother, he said that it was impossible for that to happen, especially since he wasn't that type of person. then asking if it was possible that there was a big misunderstanding, and in response, the Naja asks if he was her boyfriend or not, and if he was on her side or not. Apparently, the only thing the snake wants is a simp who doesn't value his own dignity to be her doormat. The girl is so clueless that she says that without $1 billion, Lin couldn't get away with this, but her boyfriend says that that was enough and that she was already crossing the line. Lin then asks if she had any kind of diamond on her, you know where, and asked who she was to be able to ask for so much money. This girl was asking for a good beating, in every possible way it seems, and even told the protagonist to be careful with his words, because if she published this on the neighboring social network, it would be bad for him. But Lin replies like a superior being, saying that from the beginning he hadn't touched any part of her body, and asked if she really thought that in a house like that there was no security system. Not knowing what to do now, the disgusting one decided to appeal to her boyfriend, asking him to say something too, but he simply turned his back on a despicable being like her. At that moment, she asked if he didn't love her anymore, and he simply replies that she had done a regrettable thing, and yet she had the audacity to speak to him. After this whole show, the protagonist said that the door was behind the disgusting one, so it was better for her to leave while he was in a good mood. And so the human stick ran out, not knowing what to do after being so embarrassed, and having also lost her boyfriend. After seeing that his friend went through a very complicated situation, he was asking if he was okay, and also apologizing. In response, the young man who had his heart broken said that there was no reason for him to be apologizing, but rather that he should actually thank him for what he did, because if it weren't for that, he probably would never have discovered the true personality of that poisoned snake, and could have been left alone one day when she took everything he had achieved. The protagonist then said that he was happy that he thought that way and that there was something he would like to talk to him about. While they were enjoying a beautiful Asian barbecue, the young man said that if he wanted to ask something, he just had to say it. And the protagonist asks if he knew anything about the Cisco company. He replies that they had recently made a major breakthrough in chip terminal programming, and his boss said that he should take on this project. When the protagonist asks who he had contacted that time, he replies that it was manager Yang Hong-il. But according to him, sales are the responsibility of Vice President Yoon Jin-min, and asks the protagonist why he was asking those things, and if he had any interest in the sector. However, he replies that he was just curious about one thing, and that it was nothing major. Next, he tells his friend that he couldn't be without a car, so it was better for him to keep that one. This is a humble friend. He didn't let the money go to his head, but still, giving a car, I think, is a bit too much. The young man decided to politely refuse Lin's offer, saying that he couldn't afford to accept such an expensive car, and he just told him to take the vehicle's key. After that, he comments that he knew the protagonist wanted him to work with him, but he still wanted to try to manage on his own for a bit, and if he couldn't anymore, then Lin could help him a little. After seeing that he was really a true friend, no matter what happens, they decided to toast to celebrate their reunion. But the protagonist said that he wouldn't let him go home until he was completely wasted, only then to end the night in the right way, especially after so long without seeing each other. The next morning, his friend had left a plate of breakfast for him, and there was a message that he still had work to do, so he was leaving before him. Upon seeing that, he thought that he also needed to go. But during his breakfast, he received a sudden order, where the only message that described the order was about writing essays, leaving him completely unsure of what was actually happening. After that, he decided to call the person who placed the order, and comments that he was just a delivery guy, and asks if she was sure she wanted to write about him, because if she made a mistake on such an important matter, it would undoubtedly affect her graduation grade. However, the young woman replies that he had misunderstood, and that it was actually just for him to help her type her work into the computer. However, she was in a bit of a hurry, so she asked him to go to her address as soon as he could, and as soon as she said that, he was already out the door of his car to go to the location. We then have a cut to a scene at a maritime engineering school, and we see a good-looking young man with a bouquet of flowers who was apparently about to confess to a girl or something. Speaking of the girl, she soon appears, and her name is Jing Qiao. The boy then begins to declare himself, saying that his graduation would be soon, and therefore he hoped she would be his girlfriend. He tells her that from that moment on, the passenger seat of his car would only belong to her, and no one else. As soon as he showed a ring with a solitaire to the girl, her eyes filled with tears, and when she was about to say yes, the protagonist appears, stealing the whole scene and also making his bouquet fly away. He then asks the young people where the main building of that school was. The girl quickly changed her personality completely, saying that he just had to follow the school gate and enter, and it was the most structured building. As soon as he left there, he thanked the young girl for the recent information given. The young man asked again if she would accept being his girlfriend, but with a completely snobbish look, she says she refused to do so. But he comments that he thought she was going to say yes recently, and asked why she had changed her mind now. She just replied that his car wasn't good enough for her, and that car the protagonist was in was her final choice. as if she had the ability to choose something like that, since she was broker than the guy who liked her, as she didn't even have a car apparently. If I were this guy, I would simply pretend that this materialistic choice no longer existed and would go on with my happy life. In one of the computer labs or something like that, we see a girl named Liu Wei who couldn't do something and was also giving up. The girl was so tired that her fingers were numb. That's how I feel when I finish writing my scripts for my videos. Her friend replies that she had no other choice but to buy a printed version of the paper with her small expenses, then asking her friend to hold on a little longer, and the delivery boy would soon arrive there to help them. And by the way, this girl's name is Zhao Weiran. Speaking of the protagonist, it didn't take long for him to arrive at the location, and he was asking who Miss Zhao was, saying he was the delivery boy. As soon as he arrived, she told him to sit there, as they were going to start working soon. She comments that she thought she could finish that process in 4 hours, and he could be sure that she would pay for the extra hours he worked. However, as soon as he checked the girl's work, he realized that there were a lot of errors in the work, and comments that if they handed in something like that, they might not even be able to graduate. However, the girl asked how that was possible, since it had been sold to her by her classmate who had also studied physics, and by the way, did very well. Clearly, he found what happened suspicious because the guy sold something of terrible quality and tries to explain to the girl what was wrong with that work, asking if she now understood what he meant. Not knowing what to do now, she was asking what she should do at this moment, and he replies that he had a new argument that could be good for that topic. Basically, she would use Maxwell's demon for the second possibility of doing something that I didn't quite understand. These technical things are not for me. And speaking of which, not even the girl understood what he had just said. Good thing I'm not alone in this. After that, he began to think of a way to draw that on a piece of paper, since the girls were not understanding anything apparently. While the young lady was trying to understand what the protagonist was saying, the girl behind her was thinking that it was amazing for a delivery boy to know how to speak perfectly about subjects related to thermodynamic laws. Already completely lost and not understanding anything, the blonde girl just asked him to speak a little slower, but apparently, he had already repeated it several times, and she still didn't understand anything. As he had no other alternative but to rewrite the work himself, he simply began to write a copy for them. In her thoughts, she was wondering if that was what people meant by the phrase, the best of the best. 2 hours later, the work was completed, and he told her to take that to her professor, and there would be no problem at all. However, as always, there has to be some blessed soul to delay people's lives. This time was no different, and it didn't take long for the envious one to appear this time, saying that all of that was absurd. She then asks if he had a screw loose to be shouting, and asks what the envious one was doing there, since he had an appointment. The scum then says that since it was the protagonist who wrote her paper, that was absurd, and if she dared to take it to the professor, she would certainly be reprimanded. Her friend then, afraid that something might go wrong too, comments that he was just the delivery boy, and to prevent something from going wrong, they couldn't simply trust him. Lin then suggested that they take it to the professor first, so that he could review it, especially since they didn't have much time to waste arguing about the matter. And so the blonde girl did, going to the professor so she could show her work. In the teacher's lounge, she calls for the advisor so that he could evaluate her essay. As she was apparently already very late in submitting her report, the old man asked if she really wanted to graduate. With apologies, she said that she wanted her essay to be the best possible, and that's why it took a little while to finish it. The old man, upon taking a good look at the girl's essay, was somewhat surprised by a work like that. Thus, he asked her if it was really she who had written that. We all know it wasn't, but the girl still said that it was she who wrote it. The old man realized that there was no way she could have written an essay like that, because with her current level, that was certainly something she wouldn't be able to do. Poor girl. This time, the one who was surprised was the little blonde, who asked what that meant to her advisor. The scum from before, already wanting to mess up the girl's life even more, comments that the one who had written that essay was precisely our protagonist. In his thoughts, he was thinking that the professor had made that face because the essay was horrible, and now he wanted to see how Lin would get out of this situation. Next, the professor asks what kind of person the protagonist was, and if it was really he who wrote that. To top it all off, a useless being said that that guy wasn't even a student at that school, and was just a delivery boy. According to the scum of society, the protagonist just wanted to make money in any way he could, and that's why he deceived the girl from before. The old man, upon hearing this, ended up slamming the table, which made the blonde girl very afraid of what was to come, and she began to apologize for the mistake she had made. However, to her surprise and everyone else's, the old man was actually completely impressed with that essay, saying that that work was incredible. That's how you end the fantasies of toxic people. You could already see that everyone there was left completely not understanding what was happening. To explain a little better, the professor said that there weren't even many professors in that school who could do such a well-done job as that. When a female professor heard what he said, she asked if he was referring to a high-level essay And the old man replies yes, then telling the professor to take it and take a look for herself, in case she didn't believe him. While the professors and the female students focus their attention only on the work that the protagonist wrote, we see the disposable being from before on the sidelines, not knowing how to act with that reaction from the professors. To finish off the scum from before even more, the professor said that that work could certainly be sent to a scientific journal. The professor didn't know what to do other than call our protagonist a genius. As Lin was a completely humble young man and exuded humility wherever he goes, he just thanked the professors for the compliments. He said that that was just a common essay and was not as impressive as they said it was. From the face the scum of society made, you could already see that he didn't like at all that the protagonist had come out well in that situation. After the compliments received, he decided to leave his card with them in case they needed anything. The professor wished to have another opportunity to exchange some ideas with our protagonist in the future. As there was nothing more to do there now, he simply decided to leave them be. The blonde girl from before then comments that she would like to talk to him in case she had any questions about physics again in the future. He just replies that he would do it when he was free and finally says goodbye to them. The envious and despicable being from before asks the girl why she was acting that way, especially because he thought that the protagonist was just a delivery boy who had a little knowledge of physics. She put the scum in his place, saying that he was just jealous, because besides the protagonist being smarter than him, he was also much more handsome. Returning to Lin, he ended up receiving a call from some employee who said that there had been a problem with the lithography. When he asks what happened, the person replies that the contract and the deposit had been denied. However, that morning, the head of the lithography company said that their institute had international credit problems, and that's why he rejected their request. Upon hearing this, Lin was left not quite understanding this problem that the person had mentioned. The person on the phone comments that there might be someone trying to sabotage their contract. The protagonist then recognizes that no one other than Cisco could want to do something like that. Thus, he decided to abort the issue of the lithography machines for now, and it would take a while until he reached the house of the person who made the call. Therefore, she was to go help another person in the development of the new system until he arrived. In his thoughts, we see that apparently he wasn't the only one to realize the role of chips, so there was still much to be explored there. As soon as he arrives at the Kyushu Pavilion, he received a new order on his app, and the message only said for him to pick up something, but it didn't specify what necessarily. Again, he made a call to find out what it was about, and the person said that it was for him to pick up a bookshelf, so he should be quick about it. There always has to be a human being who doesn't care about others, and this time was no different either. Lin even tries to argue, saying that the bookshelves were too big, and therefore it was better for him to hire a van to do it. However, the person on the phone said that he would pay £100 and the van rental cost at least $200, so if he didn't go get it, he would file a complaint about our protagonist. As soon as they hung up the phone, he ended up receiving a sudden message, and the message said that in view of his recent performance, they would temporarily suspend his delivery driver status. He was to report to a specific unit at 9 a.m. the next day so that he could receive business training and rejoin the team after passing the evaluation. This ended up leaving him speechless with that, especially since it was the second time something similar had happened to him, and practically for no reason at all. After that, his friend appeared again and asked him about what he talked about when he met with the other party. Apparently, after studying the specific delivery options, the other party said that the contract can be signed first, but the delivery would have to wait a bit. When he sat down for a bit to think better about the matter, he realized that Cisco was already taking control of the patent and was trying to make him look like an imitator when they launched the 1.0 program. Next, he asked if the young man knew the value of the order he had signed, and if he also knew when the second batch of orders would be delivered. He replies that the value was 130 million, and the estimated delivery time was approximately 3 months. Upon hearing this, he realized that 3 months would be enough for him to put his move into action. After that, the protagonist asks his friend if he was hungry, and if he would like to order something to eat on the way. However, he replies no, but he would still like to borrow something from him. Thinking that the young man was going to ask for the car keys, he tells him where the keys were, and says that there was a sports car in the garage. But to the protagonist's surprise, his friend was referring to a PlayStation 5 that he had seen in his office, and asks if he could borrow it. Upon seeing that the young man was interested in other things, he told him to feel free, but asked if he wouldn't like to ride in a sports car and have a double date. In response, the young man said no and thanked him for it, but he preferred to spend his time playing games, especially because his recent experience with relationships must have created some kind of trauma for him. At this moment, we have a cut to the Lin building, and we see the Divine Lady's friend organizing things there before they could actually start operating. The girl then thanks him for having bought so much delicious food for them to taste, and he asked where the other young man was so that they could have a meeting together. She replies saying that the other young man was in his office, and therefore they could go up to have the meeting. In the office, the young man asked if the protagonist had any specific task for them, and he said that he needed them to disguise themselves as customers and go to Cisco to help him with the business. Basically, he wanted to buy 1 billion terminal chips. Not understanding what was happening, the girl asked why the disguise, although she understood the business part. I'm referring to the characters with nicknames, because I always forget these Korean or Chinese names. He then replies that he didn't actually want to buy Cisco's products, and that they were just going to pretend. Excited about the situation, the girl asked if Cisco had offended him in any way, and he said that offend is just a nickname. It was more like they had climbed on his head and defecated on it. This made her even more excited, and she said that they couldn't just let this slide. The young man next to her comments that this might not work out, because for a project of this magnitude, the other side would certainly evaluate their company's credentials and reputation. Therefore, even if he tries to find a random company to borrow, he would be exposed. With this comment, the protagonist remembered that he had blah blah to be able to do this, and the young man comments that the size of the blah blah company was certainly good, but he wondered why they would cooperate with them. He then replies that he actually owned about 20% of blah blah's shares, so there would be no problem with a temporary agreement between two executive positions. After hearing what their boss had said, you could already see that they were speechless. But soon the girl let out the joke with a hint of truth, saying that she wished her boss would adopt her. After that, he left his card with them, and basically, those were the spare keys to his house, so they should go there and get a better car. Because you couldn't talk business without being properly prepared for it. As she didn't know where the protagonist's house was, she asked where his residence was located. He replies simply, saying that it was in the Kyushu Pavilion, which was just the most expensive pavilion in the entire city they were in. Before they could continue, they asked Lin to go ahead, because they still needed some time to digest all that information for a while. Finally, Lin arrived at the commercial building, and it seemed that there were many people there who needed training. The administrative assistant of the operations department appears next, saying that everyone was there for the training test, so they should follow her, as they were going up to the location where the training would take place. At the location, with all the students sitting in their proper places, she introduced the operations director, and he would be their training instructor. Upon seeing that the protagonist was in a place without a uniform, he asked if he was there for a beauty contest dressed like that, but he replies that if it were a beauty contest, he would be wearing something better, so much so that the operations director couldn't even compete with him. The rattlesnake then told him to be careful with his language, because that was not the place to be ignorant. After that, the director said that each of them there would pay a compensation of 3,000 yuan and would stay there for 3 hours to reflect, and only then would he unlock their privileges. People began to comment among themselves, and some did not agree apparently with that fee he had mentioned. The scum ahead just said for them to pay their fees then. Otherwise, whoever didn't want to pay just had to leave at that very moment. A young man, outraged by the situation, says that that was a bit exaggerated on their part, and the director asks what they were talking about, because they were just following the rules, and if he couldn't pay, he just had to leave. Thus, he decided to do just that, and said that he didn't care about that place. But before leaving, he comments that by some chance, he had recorded exactly what they had just said, and he was going to post it on the internet so that everyone could see who they really are, leaving both the scum and the rattlesnake surprised that he had done something like that, especially without them being able to actually notice it happening. And that's where we'll leave it for today. Now I have to ask for your opinion. What did you think of the story? Let me know in the comments and give it a rating on a scale of 0 to 10. I'm kind of on the fence about what score to give it, so I need your help to decide.